Chapter 101. Aftermath. The flashing red and blue glow of sheriff's cruisers lit the otherwise empty parking lot. Yellow tape fluttered in the night breeze, sectioning off the scene. Deputies moved in and out, their radios crackling with clipped chatter. Chris pulled in quietly, killing the headlights before stepping out. His eyes scanned the scene with the practiced calm of a man who'd stood at too many scenes like this. But the moment he spotted the sheet-covered stretcher being wheeled into the coroner's van, his chest tightened. At the far end, Edward stood alone, arms crossed, jaw tight. Chris strode over. "Ed," he said, voice low. "What's going on?" Edward turned, and for the first time in years, Chris noticed how much older the man looked under the streetlights. His face was set, but grief lined the corners of his eyes. "I was supposed to meet Andrew for drinks," Edward sighed flatly. "He never showed. Tracked his phone here." He exhaled slowly, eyes flicking toward the stretcher. "By the time I arrived, the sheriff's department had already locked the place down." Chris studied him, noting the way Edward's hand twitched slightly against his arm. Pain contained by discipline. "What did you see?" Chris pressed. Edward's voice hardened. "Not much. But I got close enough before they moved the body. Werewolf claw marks, Chris. Deep. No mistaking it." Chris's jaw clenched, but he only gave a small nod. "The sheriff's people," Edward continued, "think it was an animal attack. That's the story they'll believe. But," he pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, unlocked it, and handed it over. "I talked to the security guard, convinced him to let me copy this footage before the department collected it." Chris held the phone steady as the grainy video played. The parking lot. The empty rows. And then, a dark Camaro roaring out, fast. The hood streaked with something dark that glistened under the lamps. Blood. The driver's face was blurred in the low light, but it didn't matter. Chris knew that car. Derek Hale. The silence stretched between them. Chris stared at the screen a moment longer before lowering the phone. His features stayed controlled, but Edward could see the tension in his shoulders. "I know Andrew had a bad habit of running his mouth," Edward sighed, bitterness creeping into his tone. "But he was a good kid. He didn't deserve this." Chris met his eyes. There was no denying Edward's care for the boy, no denying his pain, either. "I promise you," Chris said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of an oath, "we'll find who did this to Andrew. And they'll pay for it. But not tonight. Not with hot heads. Not with half the truth. He deserves better than that." Edward's jaw worked as if he wanted to argue, but after a beat, he gave a reluctant nod. Chris clapped him once on the shoulder, then looked back toward the taped-off lot. The coroner's van was pulling away, the stretcher already hidden inside. Andrew was gone. And if the footage was to be believed, Derek Hale had Andrew's blood on his hands. Chris kept his face still, but inside he knew the fire had already been lit. About an hour later, Chris returned home, the fire still smoldering beneath the surface, held tight behind the familiar mask he wore so well. The house was still and silent when he let himself in, shutting the door behind him with more care than usual. The Argents prided themselves on discipline, on composure, but grief had a way of making the walls heavier. The kitchen light was on. Victoria sat at the table, a mug of tea in her hands. The steam curled upward in the dim glow. "You should have gone back to sleep," Chris said quietly as he stepped in. Her eyes lifted to meet his. "I couldn't," she replied simply. "Not after we lost one of our own tonight." He moved to the cupboard, retrieved a second cup, and she poured without asking. He sat across from her, hands wrapped around the warm porcelain. For a time, neither of them spoke. The silence carried its own weight, punctuated only by the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Victoria set her mug down. Her voice was soft, but her words carried sharp edges. Andrew was so young. He had his whole life ahead of him. She hesitated, the flicker of a mother's worry darkening her expression. "Things like this, they make me wonder about Allison. About her being a hunter." Chris didn't answer. He drank, eyes fixed on the dark liquid, as though the right words might be found at the bottom. Victoria studied him for a beat, then asked, "So what did you find?" Chris exhaled slowly. "All the evidence points to Derek Hale." Her gaze sharpened. "But," he leaned back, tired lines etched across his face. "But something feels off." Victoria tilted her head, urging him on. "Like what?" "There's security footage," Chris said. "Shows Derek pulling into the parking lot. Shows him leaving, fast. Blood on his hood. His brow furrowed. But there's nothing of Andrew. Not arriving. Not walking in. Nothing. As if he just appeared dead on the pavement." Victoria folded her arms, thoughtful. "And we don't know why Andrew was even there." Chris nodded. Exactly. It doesn't add up. I've got our people digging deeper. Checking angles. Timelines. Anything that can tell us what really happened. She reached for her cup again, but her eyes never left his. I trust your instincts, Chris. But you know as well as I do, we can't hold our people back for long. Not after something like this. They'll want blood. Chris's jaw tightened. He gave a slow nod, finishing his tea in a single swallow. I know. The silence returned, heavier than before. Both of them sat with it, knowing the storm wasn't far away. Chapter 102. An eventful morning. Lucas's perspective. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and clipped grass through the gardens of the Lockwood estate. My lungs filled with it as I ran, each stride eating up the gravel paths with ease. Beside me, Milo bounded joyfully, snapping at a bird that dared to skim too close to the hedges. Then, sharp, piercing, cutting through the morning like glass. A sound no human could hear. My stride faltered. My head snapped toward the woods beyond the estate walls. Malia. I slowed, whistled Milo to heel. Stay, I told him firmly, crouching to look him in the eye. His ears flicked uncertainly, but he sat down, tail thumping once before stilling. I scanned the windows of the house. Nothing. The staff wouldn't be out here this early. Good. I inhaled, braced, then vaulted the garden wall in one fluid leap, landing lightly on the other side. The woods greeted me with silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of branches. I moved quickly, weaving between the trees, drawn to the source of the call. And there she was, Malia, standing rigid, her face pale but hard, like she was holding a storm inside. I knew instantly this wasn't a casual meetup. What happened? I asked. Her jaw clenched. Derek was set up. Last night. They dumped a hunter's body on his car. Andrew, the one he beat up at some gas station. The Argents think he killed him. I let that sink in, my mind turning. Laura. She told him to lay low. Malia's eyes flicked away, like she hated repeating it. But someone wanted this. Someone wants blood between our family and the Argents. I nodded, the gears in my head grinding. Does Derek have any idea who? She shook her head, frustration flashing. He said it looked like a werewolf. Threw the body right on his hood, then ran. But, something was off. He couldn't place it. Still, the Argents won't care about details. They just know it was a werewolf. They'll come looking, I muttered. But they only suspect Derek right now. Right now, she repeated pointedly. Then she fixed me with a look. You might think you're fine, but what about Isaac? He's still learning, Lucas. He doesn't have proper control. And Allison, how long before she figures him out? I exhaled slowly, not wanting to admit she was right. I'll handle it. I'll make sure Isaac stays away from Allison until this blows over. Malia nodded, but her next words were sharp. I'm not going back to school for a while. That's a mistake, I shot back. You vanish and they assume your family has something to hide. Her brow furrowed. So what, you think I should just go back like nothing happened? Yes, I said firmly. That's exactly what we do. You, me, Isaac, we keep showing up. No cracks, no gaps. Normal. The less suspicion, the better. Her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she muttered, normal. Right. I glanced toward the trees, then back at her. You've got me and Isaac. Whatever this is, we face it together. The tension eased just enough for her shoulders to lower, though her eyes still burned. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which way the world would tilt. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, even though Laura had told him, begged him, to lay low, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping through his fingers. Waiting had never been his style, especially not when the answers were locked away behind steel doors and toe tags. The morgue was quiet, eerily so. Too quiet, even for Derek's taste. The smell of antiseptic and cold steel clung to the air, mingling with something heavier, metallic. Andrew's body lay under the pale sheet, still and small beneath the fluorescent lights. Derek pulled it back slowly. For a moment, his chest tightened. He hadn't liked Andrew, hell, he barely tolerated the guy's mouth, but no one deserved this. He leaned in, eyes narrowing, scanning with human precision and a wolf's senses. Every mark, every wound, every bruise. Claw rakes across the torso, deep enough to show everyone it was a werewolf kill. Too clean. Too deliberate. Derek searched longer, using every instinct, every sense. Nothing. No hair. No scent beyond Andrew's blood, antiseptic, and faint traces of the coroners from when they handled the body. Whoever staged this had been meticulous. Too meticulous. Jaw tight, Derek slid the sheet back over the body. He had no choice but to leave. The hall outside was dim, the emergency lights buzzing faintly. Derek kept his steps light, his ears straining. But just as he reached the exit, movement. Shadows. Boots. 3 hunters stepped into the corridor, blocking his way. Among them was a familiar face, Edward, the older hunter. His face was grim, carved with grief and rage. "You," Edward spat, voice low and shaking. Before Derek could speak, the hunters lunged. Steel glinted under the light. Derek moved fast, parrying, striking, his fists slamming against ribs and jaws. He fought hard but held back, pulling his blows, careful not to kill. Each second of restraint cost him. One hunter crumpled under a hard punch to the gut. Another slammed into the wall, groaning. Derek turned just in time to block Edward's strike, but pain ripped through his side. The blade slid deep, burning instantly. The smell of wolfsbane hit his nose before the sting even registered fully. His body recoiled, his strength faltering. Derek snarled, shoving Edward back with raw force, then struck once, twice, 3 times until the older man slumped to the ground, dazed but alive. The blade wrenched free from Derek's body as Edward fell. His breath hitched, sharp and shallow. Already, the poison spread, crawling like fire through his veins. Derek staggered, forcing himself forward, refusing to collapse here, not in front of them, not in this place. He bolted for the nearest exit, stumbling into the morning air. By the time he reached his car, his hands shook, his skin clammy, his vision swimming at the edges. He drove anyway, jaw clenched, every muscle screaming against the wolfsbane coursing through him. Whoever had staged this wanted him buried, by the Argents, or by any other means, it didn't matter. And for the first time in a long while, Derek Hale wasn't sure if he could fight his way clear. Chapter 103. Cracks in the glass. The drive was agony. Derek's knuckles were white on the wheel, sweat dripping down his temple as the wolfsbane burned through his blood like wildfire. Every breath felt heavier, every blink slower. The road blurred. Twice, he nearly veered off before jerking the car back into its lane. He bit down hard, forcing himself to stay awake, to stay moving. The Hale house was too far. He couldn't risk leading hunters there anyway. No, the only option left was the animal clinic. Deaton. Derek clenched his jaw. If anyone could flush the poison out before it consumed him, it was the veterinarian with secrets and steady hands. Each mile stretched into a battle. His vision pulsed in and out of focus, lights streaking, trees blurring together. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, erratic, wild. Finally, mercifully, the squat shape of the clinic came into view. Derek swerved into the gravel lot, braking too hard. His car shuddered to a stop. For a long moment he just sat there, chest heaving, forehead pressed against the wheel. He wasn't sure if he could move again. But he forced himself out, stumbling, one hand clutching his bleeding side. His boots dragged across the pavement toward the clinic door. Locked. Snarling, Derek fumbled with the handle, then shoved, too weak to break it. Instead, he went around back, finding the small side door most people never noticed but Deaton always used. It yielded with a shaky push. Inside, the familiar smell of antiseptic and animals hit him. It was dark, silent. No Deaton. Damn it, Derek rasped, his voice raw. He staggered forward, collapsing against the counter for support, his blood leaving smears along the edge. His legs gave out once, twice, but he dragged himself deeper into the clinic, toward the storage room where Deaton sometimes kept patients overnight. The shadows there welcomed him. He slumped into the corner, his breathing ragged, vision narrowing to a tunnel. His claws flexed weakly against the tile as if even his body didn't know whether to fight or surrender. The last thing Derek thought before the darkness claimed him was simple, bitter, and all too familiar. Not like this. And then he passed out, hidden in the quiet of the clinic, waiting for help that hadn't arrived yet. Some time later. Lucas's perspective. The day had been painfully normal. Lectures, scribbled notes, the quiet buzz of Beacon Hill's high going through its motions. But normal never lasted. The moment the car pulled up near the school, I knew. The engine's hum was ordinary, the scent of gasoline faint. What wasn't ordinary was the smell riding on the breeze. 2 men, sharp with steel, faint traces of wolfsbane clinging to their clothes, and beneath it all, the unmistakable burn of the hunter's mark on their skin. I kept my face neutral, glancing sideways. Malia was tapping her pen against her notebook, Isaac half distracted in conversation with another student. Neither of them twitched. Neither of them noticed. Of course they didn't. This was what being a true alpha meant. The world whispered to me in ways it didn't to others. I raised my hand, casual. Bathroom. The teacher waved me off without looking up. I walked, unhurried, until the hallway bent out of sight. Then I moved. Out the doors, past the lot, following my nose. The hunters hadn't come close enough to risk being overheard, but they weren't that far. By the time I reached the edge of the parking lot, I spotted them. Two men standing by the open trunk of a nondescript car. Black case opened wide, revealing equipment that screamed surveillance, directional mics, a thermal scope, etc. I focused, letting my hearing stretch. "You sure about this, Ed?" The younger one asked, his voice uneasy. "Malia Hale's just a kid. We have a code." The older one, Ed, snapped the latch on a device, jaw set. Andrew was also just a kid. Barely older than her. Didn't stop them. The younger hunter shifted. "We still don't know what exactly happened." "Then explain to me why Derek Hale was at the morgue," Edward shot back, eyes burning. "He wasn't there to grieve. He was there to destroy evidence. Even in death, Derek disrespected Andrew's body." The younger one lowered his voice. "Chris told us to stay put. He's not going to like this." Edward slammed the trunk shut. Loud, final, like a gavel. "Malia and Laura Hale are our only options to find Derek. You want to go after an alpha." The other man shook his head quickly. "Didn't think so. We don't touch the girl. We just let her lead us to him." That was enough. I stepped forward silently until I was right behind them. Two hands lifted, one for each back. The charge came instantly, lightning dancing down my arms in small jagged arcs. They stiffened, shocked, paralyzed, then dropped to the asphalt like discarded marionettes. Out cold. I exhaled, the air still humming faintly with leftover static. Then I just stood there for a moment, looking at them. Chapter 104. Quiet Fix. Lucas's perspective. The hunters lay sprawled on the asphalt, unconscious, their gear scattered at their feet. Lucas crouched between them, jaw tense. He knew they wouldn't stay down long. Lightning was effective, but temporary. In less than an hour, they'd wake up with splitting headaches and questions that would only escalate things further. Lucas's eyes drifted back to the car. The trunk was still open, gear gleaming under the weak midday sun. His gaze landed on a case marked with a red cross. He popped it open and found rows of neatly packed tranquilizers. Perfect. He took two, flicked off the safety caps, and without hesitation injected each hunter in the neck. Both men twitched, then went still again, their breathing steady but deep. Lucas pulled the needles free and tossed them back in the case. "These should keep you two out for at least 12 hours, he muttered under his breath. "Time I can't afford to waste." He dragged their limp bodies into the backseat of the car, stacking them carefully so no heads would be seen through the windows. Then he closed the door quietly and stepped back. The car was parked in a secluded corner of the lot, shielded from casual traffic by a cluster of trees. With any luck, no one would notice it for hours. Lucas stood there a moment longer, staring at the locked car, his reflection ghosted in the tinted glass. This isn't solving the problem. Just delaying it. He slipped back into the school, blending into the flow of students like he'd never left. By the time he took his seat, the class was already underway, proceeding as usual. The teacher droned on, words lost to the buzzing in his head. Lucas tapped his pen against the desk, forcing himself to look attentive. But inside, thoughts churned. This is spiraling. Faster than any of us thought. The Hales. The Argents. Every move, every reaction, is exactly what someone wants, fuel on a fire. And we don't even know who's holding the match. He clenched his jaw. Derek's name surfaced in his mind. The hunters said he was at the morgue. Probably digging for clues. But in times like this, the truth doesn't matter. Perception does. Derek's made it worse just by being seen there. Now, the suspicions against him seem more credible. Lucas stared at the notes on his desk without reading them. The tip of his pen tapped harder, faster. I've bought myself some time with those two hunters. But when they wake up, then what? The teacher called on another student. The classroom buzzed back to life. Lucas forced himself still, quiet, but the storm in his head didn't fade. This isn't just about the Hales and the Argents anymore. If I don't figure this out, Beacon Hills is going to turn into a battleground. Back at the clinic. The faint antiseptic sting of the clinic hit Derek's nose before anything else. His eyelids dragged open, heavy as stone, and blurry shapes swam into focus. A ceiling light hummed above him. Shadows stretched across the walls. He was lying on a treatment table in a closed-off room, the faint clink of metal tools echoing somewhere nearby. Deaton. The vet moved methodically at a counter, sliding vials into testing equipment, notes scrawled beside them. When he glanced back and saw Derek stirring, he crossed the room with his usual calm, quiet steps. You're awake, Deaton said evenly, though his eyes tracked Derek closely. Derek's throat was raw when he spoke. Feels better. But it's still there. He closed his eyes, breathed shallow. The burn hadn't left his veins. It was weaker, muted somehow, but still eating at him from the inside. You're right. Deaton's tone was clinical, patient. I slowed the spread of the poison, but I couldn't remove it. Derek frowned. His mind was foggy, but sharp enough to catch that. What do you mean? Deaton didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured at the testing equipment on the counter. Rows of small vials, each glowing faintly under the lab light. This isn't ordinary wolfsbane, he said finally. It's a rare type, more aggressive. Without the exact strain that was used on you, I can't make a cure. Not one that will work. Deaton's voice grew heavy. I'm working on it, but it could take days just to narrow down the right strain. Derek's jaw clenched. Confusion gave way to grim acceptance. How long do I have? Deaton hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Then, in a quiet voice, at most, 48 hours. The number hit Derek like a physical blow. He swung his legs off the table, forcing himself upright even as his muscles screamed. Immediately, Deaton was at his side, hands up to steady or restrain him. What are you doing? Derek's eyes burned, stubborn and sharp despite the poison. I know who stabbed me. Edward something. If I find him, I find the exact strain he used. That's the only way. Deaton's voice hardened in a rare flash of sternness. You're in no condition to fight, or even stand for long. I'll tell Laura. She can find the hunter. Derek shook his head, his whole body trembling with the effort of just staying on his feet. No. This is my mess. I fix it. His hand clenched at the edge of the table. He was already thinking of ways to find that hunter, despite the black haze crowding the corners of his vision. Deaton sighed, the sound weary, almost sorrowful. You're as stubborn as your sister. Before Derek could answer, the prick of a needle bit into his neck. He spun toward Deaton, teeth bared, but already the sedative dragged at his limbs, his strength evaporating. His vision swam again, narrowing to nothing. The last thing Derek saw was Deaton's steady gaze, calm and unreadable as ever. Then darkness took him. Chapter 105. After school. Laura was halfway down the Hale House staircase when her phone rang. Deaton's name flashed across the screen. Her stomach tightened a little. He never called unless it was serious. She answered briskly, what is it? On the other end of the line, Deaton's voice came through calm and steady, but there was something underneath it, a subtle tension, a sense of urgency she couldn't ignore. Listen carefully, he said, his words deliberate. Your brother is here at the clinic. He's alive and currently stable, but he's been seriously injured. Someone stabbed him, and the blade was laced with a rare and dangerous variety of wolfsbane. She felt her heart skip a beat. I've done everything I can to slow the spread of the toxin. Deaton continued, but this particular variety is very difficult to treat. Without a precise sample of the same substance, without knowing the exact strain used in the attack, I won't be able to formulate an antidote. And without that, the effects of the poison will only get worse. Laura stopped cold on the steps, grip tightening around the phone. How bad? Bad, Deaton admitted. At most, 48 hours unless we find the source. Her pulse spiked. And Derek? He's unconscious, Deaton said. He tried to leave and handle it himself. I sedated him. He wouldn't have made it 2 blocks in his condition. For a moment Laura closed her eyes, fury and fear twisting together inside her. Derek, reckless as always. Charging headfirst into trouble, like fire drawn to gasoline. But the thought of losing him, no. She wouldn't allow it. I'm coming, she said sharply. The drive to the clinic blurred past in streaks of headlights and pounding heartbeats. Every stop sign felt like an insult. Her mind raced the entire way, Derek slipping through her fingers, the Argents already circling, that hunter's death pouring fuel on the fire. By the time she burst through the back entrance of the clinic, Laura was all hard edges and raw fear, ready to fight the entire town if she had to. Deaton met her in the hallway, composed as ever, but his expression softened slightly at the sight of her. He's in the treatment room. Still out. Breathing is steady. Laura didn't wait for more. She pushed past him into the room. There was Derek. Pale against the sterile white of the table, chest rising and falling in shallow rhythms, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. He looked younger like this, almost fragile, and that terrified her more than anything else. Laura stood by his side, fingers hovering above his arm but not quite touching, afraid that even her touch might jar him. Her voice was low, a promise more than words. You don't get to leave me, Derek. Not like this. She finally rested her hand on his arm, grounding herself as much as him. Behind her, Deedon stood quietly, giving her space. Laura stared down at her brother, fury burning under the fear. Whoever set him up, whoever wanted this war, they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Back at the school, the final bell echoed through the hallways of Beacon Hills High, signaling the end of another long school day. Almost instantly, the building came alive with a surge of energy as students poured out of classrooms, their voices rising in a chaotic blend of laughter, chatter, and the scrape of hurried footsteps. Backpacks slung over shoulders and sneakers squeaking against the polished floors, they spilled into the corridors like water bursting through a dam. Lucas slipped through the crowd, when a sharp voice cut through the noise. Lucas. Malia stood at the steps, arms crossed, a storm brewing in her eyes. You said you were going to talk to Isaac, she said flatly. Then she jerked her chin towards the end of the hallway. Lucas followed her gaze. Sure enough, there was Isaac, standing way too close to Allison Argent near the lockers. Laughing. Flirting. They looked like they were in their own little world, blissfully unaware that the fragile peace between the werewolves and the hunters was about to shatter. Lucas dragged a hand through his hair and sighed. I was going to. I just got distracted by other stuff. Malia arched an eyebrow. Distracted. Anyway, Lucas continued, nodding toward Isaac and Allison, I don't think we need to panic. Just look at them. Even if Isaac wore a shirt that said I'm a werewolf in giant neon letters, Allison would be too busy staring into his eyes to notice. Malia turned back to watch the pair for a long beat. Isaac leaned closer, Allison smiled in that dreamy way, and Malia groaned. Ah, you might be right. They make me want to barf. Lucas smirked, but Malia's glare cut through it. Still, we can't take that chance. So, what exactly was so important you ditched the Isaac talk? Lucas hesitated. Then, it would be better if I just show you. He pulled out his phone, thumbed out a quick text to Jenny, can't drive you home today, Patrick's coming for you. Once Patrick confirmed, Lucas pocketed the phone and nodded for Malia to follow. They cut across the road, weaving past blocks until they slipped into the wooded backlot where the hunter's car was parked. Malia frowned, catching the edge of tension in his stride. When they reached the vehicle, Lucas checked the perimeter, then opened the back door. Malia's eyes widened. Two hunters were slumped across the backseat, still as stone, breathing slow and shallow. What the hell, Lucas? Got the jump on them earlier, Lucas said calmly. They were staking out the school. Planning to use you to lead them to Derek. Malia blinked, stunned, then turned back to the unconscious men. And you just stuffed them in a car. Lucas shrugged. Bought us 12 hours. Maybe less. Had to make a call. Malia stepped back, shaking her head, but her eyes stayed locked on Lucas. There was a sharp mix in them, anger, fear, and, buried underneath, something like admiration. Chapter 106, Unintended. Lucas leaned against the open car door, his frame still, eyes fixed on the scene inside. Malia stood beside him, her arms rigid at her sides, staring down at the two unconscious hunters slumped awkwardly across the backseat like discarded mannequins. Their bodies were motionless, chests rising and falling faintly. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the nearby trees and the distant hum of traffic, barely audible from this side of the parking lot. Breaking the heavy silence, Malia finally spoke, her voice low but edged with concern. What are we supposed to do with them? Lucas let out a long, controlled exhale and rubbed the back of his neck, his gaze flicking briefly from the hunters to Malia's face. I'm still figuring that out, he admitted, the weight of uncertainty pressing into his words. Malia shifted her stance, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. You know other hunters are going to come looking. These two won't just vanish without someone noticing. Not likely, Lucas countered. From what I heard, they were working on their own. And I already disabled their phones, no signal, no tracking. Malia gave a slow nod, chewing on the thought. Lucas added, they came after you, to get to Derek. You think I was just going to sit back and let that happen? There was a pause, brief, but charged. Malia's jaw tightened, her expression hardening for a moment before something softer flickered in her eyes. I appreciate that. But I can take care of myself. I know, Lucas said, holding her gaze. But they were also talking about running into Derek at the morgue. Her brow furrowed. Why would Derek be at the morgue? Lucas shrugged. You'll have to ask him that yourself. I just know what they said before I took them down. Malia reluctantly nodded, looking back at the hunters. So, what if we just leave them here? We could, Lucas said with a shrug. I dropped them before they even knew what hit them. But they came after you. You think they'll stop if we just left them here? Malia glanced back at the unconscious pair, then back at Lucas. Her silence was answer enough. Lucas continued, his voice low but insistent. We can't leave them here anyway. This spot's too close to the school. Sooner or later, someone's going to notice. Malia clicked her tongue, frustration simmering just beneath the surface. She glanced once more at the unconscious men, then gave a reluctant nod. We should take them to the animal clinic, she said. There, we can figure out the rest. Lucas didn't argue. He gave a single nod of agreement, then circled around the front of the car and slid into the driver's seat. Malia followed, pulling open the passenger door and casting one last wary glance over her shoulder at the motionless forms in the back. Her jaw clenched as she slammed the door shut. The engine rumbled to life. Lucas steered them out of the lot and toward the back roads, the car's suspension creaking under the extra weight in the backseat. His grip on the wheel tightened as Beacon Hills High vanished in the rearview mirror. The road wound through Beacon Hills, the hum of the engine filling the silence between Lucas and Malia. The hunters in the backseat stayed unconscious, their shallow breaths the only sign of life. Malia's phone buzzed sharply halfway through. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and answered without hesitation. Laura. Lucas kept his eyes on the road, but his hearing was sharper than any speakerphone. Every word carried. Laura's voice was tight, controlled, but edged with urgency. Derek's been stabbed. Wolfsbane. Rare type. Deaton slowed it, but he doesn't have a cure. We need the exact kind that was used. Lucas felt Malia stiffen beside him. Her voice didn't waver. What do you need me to do? We need to find the hunter who stabbed him. His name's Edward. He's the only one who knows what he used. Derek's running out of time. I understand, Malia said firmly. The call ended with Laura's clipped goodbye. Malia lowered the phone, staring straight ahead. Outwardly she looked steady, calm. But Lucas could see it, the way her fingers curled into her palm, the way her jaw clenched just a little too tight. She was hurting, even if she hid it. As you heard, Malia said, forcing her voice level, we need to find this Edward guy. He's the key to saving Derek. Lucas nodded, no need to add words she didn't want to hear. Instead, he slowed the car and pulled over on the side of the road. Malia turned to him, eyes narrowing. What are you doing? Lucas twisted in his seat and reached into the back. He fished through one hunter's jacket, then pulled out a wallet. He flipped it open, thumb brushing over the ID card. Pretty sure I heard that one call this older guy Ed, Lucas said. He held up the card so she could see. And look at that, Edward Wallace. Malia leaned in, scanned the ID, then looked at Lucas. For a heartbeat, she was still, then her eyes widened, brimming with sudden emotion. A radiant smile broke across her face, and before Lucas could say a word, she let out a breathless laugh and threw her arms around him. The hug was fierce, almost trembling, as if she'd been holding back the weight. Lucas froze for half a heartbeat before returning it. Okay, he said quietly, but finding Edward is only step one. We still need the wolfsbane he used. Right, Malia said, pulling back, her voice firm again. Together, they climbed out of the car and went to the trunk. Lucas lifted it open, revealing the neat rows of hunter gear. Nestled among them were 3 glass vials, each glowing faintly in the light. Wolfsbane, Malia muttered, picking one up, sniffing cautiously. She wrinkled her nose. All of them look and smell the same to me. Lucas's hand hovered over the set, then pointed firmly to the middle vial. That one. It's sharper, stronger. Trust me. Malia glanced between the 3, then shrugged. If you say so. But we're taking all of them to Deaton. Lucas pocketed the vials carefully, shut the trunk, and they returned to the front seats. He started the engine, the weight of their discovery pressing heavy in the silence. This time, though, Malia didn't look distant. She looked determined. The car rolled back onto the road, carrying them and their unconscious cargo toward the animal clinic. Chapter 107, Understanding. The car rolled to a stop in the rear parking lot of the Beacon Hills Animal Clinic, tires crunching softly over gravel as the last golden slivers of daylight slipped beneath the horizon. Dusk stretched long shadows across the ground, swallowing the remaining warmth of the day in creeping darkness. Lucas sat still for a beat, the engine idling low before he turned the key and shut it off. Silence settled heavily around them. In the backseat, the two hunters remained motionless, their bodies slumped and breathing shallow, steady but dulled by the lingering effects of the tranquilizers. Lucas glanced over his shoulder once to confirm they hadn't stirred, then looked to Malia in the passenger seat. Come on, he said quietly. Malia nodded, her eyes flicking once toward the unconscious men before she followed him inside. The clinic was dim, quiet save for the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Deaton was already waiting in one of the treatment rooms, sleeves rolled up. His face, as always, bore that practiced calm, but there was a weight behind his eyes tonight. Beside him stood Laura, tall and composed, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her expression was as sharp and contained, but not without emotion. There was tension in her jaw, the kind that only comes from being both responsible and afraid. Lucas stepped forward and reached into his jacket pocket, producing the 3 vials. The glass clinked softly in his hand as he held them out. Found these in the hunter's trunk, he said. Pretty sure this one is the right strain, but we brought all 3. Deaton's eyes sharpened as he took them. Good. This gives us a chance. I'll confirm which it is and begin the treatment immediately. Without wasting another word, he turned and moved to his equipment, already setting the vials down with meticulous care. Laura's gaze snapped to Lucas. How did you? Before she could finish, Malia spoke up. Lucas intercepted 2 hunters at the school. They were planning to use me to track Derek. He took them out before they could do it. They're outside, in the car, one of them was Edward. Laura's brow furrowed. You brought hunters here. Unconscious. They're not going anywhere. Malia answered flatly. Laura's mouth pressed into a hard line. For a heartbeat, she looked torn, caught between alarm and a flicker of gratitude. Then, slowly, her posture shifted. The tension began to drain from her shoulders, and she looked back at Lucas. Thank you, she said, and this time the edge was gone. The words were soft, but sincere, honest in a way that cut through the stress and urgency. You may have just saved Derek's life. Lucas shrugged, trying not to meet her eyes. It's no big deal. Besides, he glanced at Malia, his tone lighter. She's been a great help training Isaac. Couldn't let her be their target. Laura's lips twitched, just shy of a smile, before she masked it again. She gave a single nod, then moved toward Deaton to check on Derek's condition. Lucas leaned against the wall, and exhaled slowly. Deaton's hands moved with steady precision, selecting one of the 3 vials and setting the others aside. He held the chosen one up against the light, his gaze sharp as if weighing its very essence. Then he nodded once. This is it. It didn't take him long to craft the antidote, mixing, diluting, preparing with practiced ease. A faint herbal scent filled the treatment room, bitter and metallic all at once. On the table, Derek lay shirtless, pale and sweating. The wound on his side was ugly, raw, veins of black spreading like roots outward from the cut. It pulsed faintly under his skin, each throb a reminder of the poison eating at him. Deaton approached, holding a small glass with the liquid cure. This will burn going down. But if it works, his body will do the rest. He tipped the glass carefully into Derek's mouth. For a moment Derek stirred faintly, his throat working to swallow. Then the room fell into silence. They all watched. At first nothing happened. Then the black veins began to recede, the angry lines shrinking back toward the wound. His flesh knit together, muscle pulling tight, skin sealing smooth. In minutes it was over, as though the injury had never been there at all. Derek's eyes flew open, glowing bright golden for an instant before dimming again. He groaned, tried to push himself up, but collapsed back onto the table. Weak, but alive. Malia rushed to his side. Laura stepped closer, her hand hovering above Derek's shoulder before settling there. Deaton checked his pulse, his expression calm but satisfied. Lucas stood a few paces back, watching the relief ripple through the Hale siblings. After ensuring Derek was healed, he slipped quietly out of the treatment room and into the cool night air. For a few minutes he simply stood there in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the town beyond, grounding him. The door creaked open. Laura stepped out, her arms folded, but the lines of strain on her face had softened. She came to stand beside him, silent for a moment, before finally speaking. You didn't need to involve yourself in this, she said, her voice low. But I'm grateful that you did. Lucas shook his head. There's someone out there trying to start a war. They've already killed once to push it forward. I can't just stand by and let it happen. Like it or not, I'm involved. Laura studied him for a long beat, her sharp gaze softened by something almost like relief. After what happened 6 years ago, trusting anyone doesn't come easy. Especially when it comes to my family. She paused. But I trust you. And frankly, we could use all the help we can get. Lucas nodded once. Laura mirrored it, their silent agreement hanging in the cool night air. Chapter 108. Zombies. The night was quiet, broken only by the hum of crickets and the faint glow of street lamps bleeding into the lot outside the clinic. Lucas stood near the door, ready to leave. Beside him were Laura and Malia, their expressions subdued, there to see him off. Lucas froze mid-step, his whole body going rigid. His head whipped sharply toward the far end of the clinic's perimeter, toward the clinic's edge where the hunter's car was parked. A cold ripple of awareness passed through him. There was someone standing there. A figure, barely illuminated by the spill of yellow light from a distant lamp, lingered near the hunter's car. They were perfectly still. Their face was obscured, half concealed in darkness, but their focus was unmistakable. Their eyes, or whatever lay beneath the shadow of that hood or hair, were locked onto the backseat of the car, where the two unconscious hunters lay. Laura followed Lucas's gaze. Malia stiffened. Who is that? Malia whispered. The question hung unanswered. The figure turned, glancing their way. Then, without a word, it bolted, slipping into the trees and vanishing into the dark woods. Lucas moved instinctively, ready to chase. But he halted mid-step, his attention caught by movement in the hunter's car. The two men stirred, groaning, shifting. Too soon. That's not possible, Lucas thought, his gut tightening. The tranquilizers should still be working for a few more hours. But the hunters weren't groggy. They shoved open the car doors and staggered out with weapons already in hand. Their eyes were bloodshot, burning with unnatural fury. Rage poured off them, thick and wrong, like something had eaten away their reason. Malia moved without hesitation. Her fangs bared, claws extending in a smooth, fluid motion as golden light flooded her irises. She dropped low, a growl rumbling from her throat as she braced herself for a fight. But Laura stepped forward and caught her arm. Wait, something's off. Malia snarled, her instincts fighting the hold, but Laura's tone was firm. That person, we just saw. That person did something to these hunters. This isn't them. Not really. The hunters advanced, blades flashing in the moonlight, movements fueled by raw aggression. There's already one hunter dead, Laura said, never taking her eyes off them. We can't afford two more. She stepped ahead of her sister, calm but coiled like steel. Let me handle this. And with that, Laura stopped forward ready to face the two raging hunters. The gravel crunched and shifted noisily under the heavy boots of the two hunters as they lunged straight at Laura, their blades slashing the air in brutal arcs. The steel gleamed faintly in the dim light, every strike thrown with a deadly precision drilled into muscle memory. Even though their faces were twisted with something closer to feral madness than human focus, their bodies told another story. Every step, every thrust, every counter was the reflex of long hours spent training to kill. Their rage was mindless, but their discipline lived on in their flesh. Laura moved like water through stone. Her body flowed between their attacks with an ease that belied the danger, each motion shaped by control, instinct, and the predatory sharpness humming in her blood. She dropped low as a blade cut for her throat, ducked under a wild slash, twisted past a blind thrust, and answered with open-handed strikes and whipping kicks that landed with bone-jarring force. Calm lived in her eyes even as violence unfolded around her. Within moments, the two hunters were on the ground, staring up at the night sky. But they didn't stay down. One groaned, his hand hanging at a strange angle, and yet he rose as if the pain didn't register. The other pushed himself up with a guttural snarl, eyes glazed and empty, rage filling every corner where reason should be. Laura's expression darkened. She knocked them down again, faster, harder, ribs cracking, shoulders dislocating under her blows. It should have been enough. But like broken marionettes, they staggered upright again. Malia's voice cut sharp across the lot. It's like they're zombies. They'll keep coming unless we put them down for good. Laura didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence carried more weight than words could. Her chest heaved, her breathing a little rougher now. Strain carved lines in her shoulders as she launched back into the fray, determination hardening each movement. She brought her leg up high and drove one back with a kick that landed like a battering ram, then spun on her heel to seize the other and hurl him into the side of a car. Metal groaned and shuddered under the impact, the vehicle trembling violently before settling again. And still, impossibly, the hunters clawed their way up from the ground, refusing to stay down. Lucas had watched long enough. Laura, step back. She glanced over her shoulder, hesitating. His tone brooked no argument. She gave a curt nod and leapt back out of range. The hunters turned toward her again, but Lucas was already moving. He blurred forward, the air cracking with the speed of his motion. In a blink, he stood in front of the first hunter. His fist shot out, not heavy but sharp and precise, driving straight into the man's jaw. The sound exploded through the night. Like a gunshot in the silence. The hunter collapsed instantly, lights out before he even hit the ground. The second turned with a roar, but Lucas was already there, faster than sight. He drove an uppercut under the man's chin, a clean strike powered by perfect technique. The second hunter's feet left the ground. He landed in a heap, unconscious. Silence rushed back into the night. Laura straightened, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. Malia's claws stayed out, her golden eyes flicking from the hunters to Lucas. The two men lay sprawled at Lucas's feet, breathing but unmoving. For now, the fight was over. Chapter 109, Aftermath. From within the dense curtain of trees, just beyond the edge of moonlight, a figure remained perfectly still. Shrouded in a darkness deeper and more impenetrable than the night itself, they stood like a phantom, silent, patient, and unseen. The forest around them breathed quietly, its silence only broken by the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional whisper of wind through branches. Beyond the tree line, the lot lay exposed. Bathed in pale moonlight and the faint artificial glow leaking from the clinic windows, every detail was laid bare. The scattered gravel of the lot, the unconscious bodies sprawled at its edge, and the trio still standing in its center. Laura Hale stood poised, radiating a steady control honed by experience. Malia beside her, tense and coiled, like a spring waiting to snap, ready, alert, alive. The two hunters who had attacked them moments before still twitched occasionally on the ground, the madness that had consumed them now gone, replaced by the unconscious stillness of defeat. And then there was Lucas. The figure in the trees tilted their head ever so slightly, a subtle motion betraying a sharp and focused interest. They watched as Lucas moved through the lot with a calm that didn't match the violence he had just unleashed. There had been no hesitation in him, no wasted motion. He had brought the hunters down with precise efficiency, quick, clean, almost surgical. The sounds of the fight still echoed faintly in the figure's memory. The sound of each strike, the cracks in the air, the thud of bodies hitting earth. Each impact had been deliberate. Controlled. The kind of control that only came from someone who had been trained, or shaped, to hurt without hesitation. Fingers flexed at the figure's side, restless, as if itching to test that strength themselves. But instead of stepping forward, they lingered, letting the cover of the wood swallow them. A whisper rose, not spoken aloud but carried in the sharp curl of their lips. Interesting. The Hale Alpha couldn't put them down, but he could. Clean. Fast. Their eyes flicked to the hunters again. Both were still breathing, though bruised and bloodied. Alive. That fact, too, seemed to amuse them. Mercy, they murmured with quiet contempt, or was it admiration? So predictable. So dangerous. For a long, silent beat, the figure didn't move. They simply watched, eyes following every subtle shift in posture, every word exchanged among the three. Like a predator taking note of its prey, not to strike, but to study. Then, with deliberate slowness, they turned and melted deeper into the forest. Their movements were unnaturally smooth, too quiet for any ordinary creature of flesh and blood. And just before they vanished completely, the faintest breath of satisfaction slipped into the air, intangible but undeniable. Good, they whispered. The game is working. Back at the clinic. The night clung to the ground like smoke, heavy, still, and thick with the mingled sense of blood, adrenaline, and the cold iron tang of violence just past. The gravel lot behind the clinic was quiet now, save for the occasional shallow breath from the two hunters lying motionless near the tree line. They were alive, but just barely. Their limbs were limp, their expressions slack, like puppets with cut strings. Whatever had driven them into that earlier frenzy had burned out completely, leaving only the bruised wreckage of their bodies and none of the rage that had animated them. For a while, no one spoke. The silence stretched, deep and weighty. Malia broke it first, her voice edged with awe. How did you do that? Lucas straightened slowly, flexing his hand once before answering. Hunters' bodies are a lot more tougher and durable than a normal person, sure. More conditioned, more resistant. But at the end of the day, they're still human. And humans all share the same weak points. Pain's one way to stop someone. Shutting the body down is another. Malia stared at him, her expression unreadable at first. Then, gradually, a flicker of something, respect, perhaps even admiration, settled into her eyes. She nodded, once. Slowly. Laura crouched by one of the hunters, her glowing red eyes scanning. Lucas joined her, the two of them studying the men's ragged breathing and glassy expressions. What do you think? Lucas asked quietly. Laura shook her head. I don't sense anything off. They look normal now. Lucas slowly nodded, his gaze narrowing on the bruises forming across the men's jaws. Malia folded her arms, sharp and frustrated. Then how did that person turn these two into raging beasts and sick them on us? Laura rose, brushing dirt from her palms. Her tone was calm but firm. That's what we need to figure out. And fast. Lucas exhaled, glancing back at the two unconscious hunters. And in the meantime, we still don't know what to do with them. It was one thing when they were just out cold. Now they're also beat up, and questions are going to come with that. Laura's eyes flicked to him, steady and decisive. Don't worry about these two. I'll handle it. What matters is you get home. It's getting late, I don't want Susan worrying. Lucas hesitated, but nodded. All right. Malia wasn't as ready to let it go. She stepped forward, her eyes flashing. But we still don't know what's going on. That thing, whoever it was, could come back. Could send more after us. Laura put a hand on her shoulder, her voice level. You're right. But tonight isn't giving us any more answers. For now, we regroup. Lucas took one last look at the two hunters sprawled in the dirt, before turning and walking away. The weight of unanswered questions pressed down, heavier than before. As he pulled away from the clinic, the shadows in the treeline seemed to watch him go. Chapter 110 Aftermath. By the time Lucas rolled up to Lockwood Estate, the night had settled into its familiar hush. Lights glowed warm in the windows, and the smell of roasted chicken drifted out as he stepped through the door. Susan greeted him with her usual tired but kind smile, made a plate for him. Jenny was already there, chattering about school while Milo sprawled under her chair, tail thumping whenever she dropped scraps. Lucas slipped into his seat, letting the rhythm of the house settle around him. Dinner was ordinary, comforting in its simplicity. Jenny animatedly recounted some story, her fork punctuating the air as Susan laughed and teased her. Lucas smiled when appropriate, chimed in when needed, and answered Susan's gentle questions about his day with easy half-truths. On the surface, it was just another family dinner. But the entire time, part of him was elsewhere. Watching hunters rise like machines after blows that should have ended the fight. Remembering the figure that stood by the car. The way Laura's eyes had carried just a flicker of unease. Afterward, he excused himself, heading upstairs with Milo padding close at his heels. His room was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you. Lucas sat on the edge of his bed, Milo settling by his feet, those sharp blue eyes watching him with quiet affection. Lucas leaned back against the headboard, exhaling slowly. The fight replayed in his head, the sound of bones cracking under Laura's fists, the way the hunters' bodies refused to stay down. He knew how fragile the line already was between the Hales and the Argents. Someone was cutting that line thinner, sharpening it into a blade. He was strong, stronger than he'd ever been in his old life. But tonight showed him strength wasn't enough. That figure in the lot, what it had done to those hunters. Puppets. That's what they'd been. Raging, mindless shells, stripped of fear and pain. He'd seen hunters mad with fury before, but not like this. Not hollowed out and filled with unnatural rage. I've never seen anything like it, he muttered under his breath. Milo whined low, nudging Lucas's hand with his muzzle. Lucas gave him a scratch behind the ears, grateful for the grounding presence. Eventually, Lucas pushed himself up and crossed the room. From the back of his closet, he pulled out a weathered box, its edges worn soft with time. Inside lay Richard's journals, dozens of them, filled with scrawled notes and tight handwriting, maps, sketches, warnings. Lucas spread them across his desk, flipping through the pages one by one. Files filled with observations on supernatural patterns, creature behavior, ancient lore, half-forgotten rituals, but nothing about controlling men like marionettes, nothing about mysterious figures hiding in shadows. Page after page, and still nothing. Finally, Lucas leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. A tired sigh escaped him. He gathered the journals, careful, almost reverent, and slid them back into their box. The questions lingered, unanswered and sharp. But for tonight, they would have to wait. Lucas shut off the lamp, climbed into bed, and let Milo curl against him. In the dark, with only the sound of Milo's steady breathing, he closed his eyes. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the night air outside the Argent house was still, heavy with the kind of silence that came before storms. Malia's question, so what are we going to do with these two, still hung in Laura's mind as she loaded the unconscious hunters into the backseat and slid into the driver's seat. I'll handle it, she had told Malia. Whether she believed that herself was another matter. The ride across town was quiet except for the low hum of the engine. The two hunters slumped in the back looked almost peaceful now, stripped of the rage that had consumed them earlier. Puppets with their strings cut. When she pulled up to the Argent house, Laura laid on the horn once, short, sharp, intentional. A signal, not a plea. The porch light flicked on, and soon enough Chris Argent stepped outside, his expression unreadable in the pale wash of light. Laura got out of the car before he could say anything, meeting him halfway with a steady, unflinching stare. Two of your hunters went after Malia, she snapped, voice tight with barely restrained fury. At her school. I'm returning them to you. Chris's eyes shifted past her, narrowing as he caught sight of the battered hunters in the backseat. He walked forward, leaned in, and took them in with one grim look. When he straightened, his voice was low. So you had to badly beat them up. Laura shook her head once. At first, they were just knocked out. But they woke up, and attacked me and Malia. She kept her tone clipped, controlled, deliberately omitting the shadowed figure that had triggered their frenzy. That was not a card she was willing to lay on the table. Chris grunted, a sound halfway between disapproval and reluctant acknowledgement. Laura pressed on. But these two idiots and their actions aren't what's important. Someone is trying to incite a conflict between us. I'm sure you've felt it too, something's off. For a long moment, Chris stood silent, jaw working. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he nodded. Laura's voice softened but carried steel. Derek didn't kill Andrew. Someone threw his body on Derek's car and ran away. That's the truth. Chris's gaze hardened, his arms crossing over his chest. Let's say that's true. Let's say your family had nothing to do with Andrew's death. But I need to hear it directly from Derek. I want him to look me in the eye when he says it. Only then can I believe it. Laura's jaw clenched, her breath flaring through her nose. You're crazy if you think I'd just hand someone from my family to you. Chris didn't flinch. Then Derek still remains the prime suspect in Andrew's death. The two of them stood there in the cold, the weight of 6 years of blood between them, unbroken by time. Chapter 111. Silence. Laura's perspective. The way back to the clinic felt longer than the one to the Argent house. Laura's hands were clenched, her knuckles pale in the moonlight. Every word Chris had said still echoed in her head. By the time she returned to the clinic, the adrenaline had drained away, leaving only the steady throb of frustration and worry. She paused just outside the door, stood in the silence for a moment, and let herself breathe. Then she pushed it open and stepped inside. The familiar sterile smell of antiseptic and herbs hit her as she entered the dimly lit clinic. Malia was sitting on a bench, arms crossed, eyes sharp the moment Laura walked in. Well? Malia asked, her tone laced with suspicion. Laura shook her head, voice flat. Chris Argent doesn't believe us. He wants to hear it from Derek himself. Malia's face twisted in disgust. So he can put a bullet in him the second he gets the chance. Laura didn't answer. She didn't need to. In the treatment room, Deaton stood by Derek's side, watching over him as he slept off the strain of both the wolfsbane and the cure. Derek's chest rose and fell steadily now, the color back in his skin, but the healing process had drained him. Deaton glanced up at Laura. How did it go? Laura forced her voice steady. As expected. He's not backing down. Derek is still their prime suspect. Deaton's gaze lingered on her for a moment, quietly measuring the weight she carried before returning to Derek. Malia moved to Derek's bedside, her hand hovering just above his arm without quite touching. We should just get him out of here, she said. Pack up, leave Beacon Hills before this gets worse. No, Laura said, sharper than she meant. Both Deaton and Malia looked at her, but she didn't waver. Running won't solve anything. Whoever set this up, they'll just follow. And the Argents will chase us anyway. The only way this ends is if we find out who's behind it. Silence settled thick in the room, broken only by the steady rhythm of Derek's breathing. Malia finally looked up at her sister. Then what's the plan? Laura didn't answer right away. She moved closer to Derek, looking down at his sleeping face. For just a moment, the hardness slipped, replaced by something raw and unguarded. The plan, she said quietly, more to herself than to them, is to make sure no one else in this family ends up on a morgue table. Malia's jaw tightened, but she nodded. Deaton said nothing, though his expression carried the same unspoken question that burned in Laura's mind. Can we hold this line, or is it already too late? The next morning. Lucas's perspective. The school was steeped in that rare, almost sacred silence that only existed in the early hours, before the bells, before the chatter, before the collective heartbeat of hundreds of students surged through the corridors. It was a stillness particular to schools, both eerie and comforting, like the building itself was holding its breath. Lucas walked those hushed halls alone, his footsteps muffled by the aging tiles beneath his sneakers. His backpack hung loosely over one shoulder. Classes weren't on his mind. Not even close. His thoughts were elsewhere. He turned a corner and made his way directly to the library without hesitation, as if he'd done this 100 times before. The heavy wooden door creaked as he pushed it open, but the space beyond remained undisturbed. Inside, the library was dimly lit, the morning sun filtering through tall windows and throwing long beams across the carpeted floor. He moved through the aisles of books with practiced ease, ignoring the empty tables in the center of the room and seeking out a quiet corner tucked between two tall shelves. There, wrapped in soft shadows and the faint scent of old paper, he took a seat. He pulled out his phone. One short text: "We have to talk. Meet me in the library." Then came the waiting. 10 minutes stretched longer than they should have. He drummed his fingers against the table, staring at the entrance. Finally, Lydia appeared. Lydia entered with her usual confidence, her stride unhurried, her presence magnetic. She spotted him almost immediately, and a playful smile flickered across her face, familiar and flirtatious. She moved toward him without hesitation, her heels making soft clicks against the floor like punctuation marks in an otherwise quiet sentence. "Well," she said as she approached, her voice low and teasing. "Fooling around in the library. How delightfully cliché." She leaned closer, close enough that her perfume, sweet, sharp, unmistakably her, hit him before her body did. "But I'm game. Let's see where it leads." Her perfume hit before she did, sweet and sharp, but Lucas didn't move to meet her. Instead, he raised a hand, gently stopping her advance. "We have to talk," he said, voice low but firm. She blinked, confusion flashing across her face. "Couldn't this wait? I mean, really, Lucas, you kind of just killed the mood." He shook his head slowly. "No, it couldn't wait. As getting involved was never a good idea," Lucas began, choosing each word with care, "but I figured, I'm young. This is the time to make a few mistakes, have some reckless fun." He exhaled, the weight of the last night pressing down on him. But things have changed. For a moment, confusion flickered across Lydia's face. Then it clicked. The color drained, and she masked it quickly with a sardonic tilt of her head. "Things have changed," she echoed. How wonderfully vague. Lucas could see through the mask, though. The rejection stung her more than she wanted him to know. She recovered quickly, the sharp gleam in her eyes returning. "Well," she said, flipping her hair back with a graceful motion. "What a shame. We could have had fun. But hey, plenty of other cute boys wandering these halls." Lucas nodded, not mockingly, not defensively. Just quietly, earnestly. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Lydia let out a sharp, dismissive snort and turned on her heel. Her heels clicked softly against the library floor as she left without looking back. Lucas sat there a moment longer, phone still in his hand, staring at the door she disappeared through. The quiet returned, but it didn't feel the same. Chapter 112. Watching. After school, in a quiet spot in the woods. The trees swayed gently, their branches breaking the late afternoon sunlight into fractured patterns on the ground. The smell of pine and damp earth lingered in the air. "So basically someone is trying to start a war between the Hale family and the Argents," Isaac said, his voice unsteady, trying to fit the pieces together. "And that person has already killed a hunter, and can somehow mess with other people's heads." Malia gave a short, grim nod. Isaac ran a hand through his curls, exhaling. "And on top of that, I have to make sure Allison doesn't figure out I'm a werewolf." "That's the gist of it," Lucas replied evenly, his tone calm. Isaac nodded again, still processing. The weight of it all pressed on his shoulders, though he tried to mask it with casualness. After a pause, he muttered, "I can tell Allison I need to focus on lacrosse after spending 3 weeks on the bench. She'll buy that." But, he trailed off, eyes narrowing. "What are we going to do about that person? The one you guys saw. The one killing people, causing all of this mess." Malia turned slightly toward him, lips parting to speak, but froze. Something shifted. Lucas had tensed. Subtly. Sharply. His posture altered in a split second, weight shifting to the balls of his feet, head angling slightly to the left, his body going still in that particular way predators do when they sense something just out of sight. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The others didn't sense it. But Lucas did. The figure was there, hidden just beyond the treeline, watching. Without hesitation, Lucas launched into motion, blurring forward with inhuman speed toward the shadow among the trees. But before he could reach it, before he could even get close, the figure turned. Just slightly. Its face was cloaked in the dimness, details obscured by light and shadow, but its mouth moved. Only a whisper. Barely audible. Directed toward Isaac. In the next instant, Isaac's body jerked violently, as if something invisible had punched straight through him. His eyes flared a brilliant, unnatural gold. His breath caught. His muscles seized. Then came the claws. His fingers contorted, nails sharpening into deadly weapons. Fangs bared. And before anyone could react, he turned sharply, toward Malia. He didn't speak. He didn't hesitate. He lunged. Isaac. Malia shouted, but the word barely left her lips before his claws slashed across her side with brutal force. She stumbled back, a strangled cry escaping as pain bloomed through her ribs. Her shirt darkened with blood, the fabric clinging to her skin. She hit the ground hard, breath coming in short, stunned gasps. Lucas skidded to a stop mid-sprint, eyes flashing with fury. He had no choice but to turn back. The figure vanished deeper into the woods, dissolving into the shadows like smoke. Cursing under his breath, Lucas dashed back toward Isaac and Malia. Isaac was already moving again, snarling like something not entirely human anymore. Isaac was already bearing down on her again, feral and wild-eyed. Lucas intercepted him just in time. With a single, sharp nudge of his shoulder, he sent Isaac flying backward. The werewolf hit the ground hard, tumbling through the pine needles and dirt, but didn't stay down. Malia collapsed to a knee, one hand pressed hard against her side, trying to stop the bleeding. Her breath came in shallow bursts, but her gaze was locked on Isaac, disbelief and pain mixing in her expression. Isaac roared and charged again, no longer seeing friend or foe, only something in his way. Lucas met him head-on. Isaac collided into Lucas with a snarl and a growl, teeth and claws bared, the air between them crackling with raw fury. Lucas's hands clamped down on Isaac's shoulders, fingers digging in like talons. Every muscle in his arms tensed, coiling with stored power, the kind that came not just from strength, but from something deeper, control, bone-deep instinct. With a sudden twist of his torso and a surge of brutal force, he launched Isaac backward like a wrecking ball breaking free of its chain. Isaac's body hit the tree with an impact that sounded like a thunderclap. Bark exploded outward. The thick trunk cracked, splitting clean down the middle as though struck by lightning. Wood splintered in all directions, branches shattering with a brittle, violent snap. Leaves, dislodged by the blast, fluttered downward like dying embers. Isaac's body dropped hard to the forest floor, limbs splayed in the underbrush. For a heartbeat, silence. Then came a low, guttural sound, less a groan, more a growl. Isaac stirred, dragging himself upright in staggered movements. His breath rasped through clenched teeth. His golden eyes blazed like fire through smoke, wild and unseeing. Pain didn't touch him, he was nothing but raw fury. Lucas narrowed his eyes. Same as the hunters. Rage without reason. Numb to pain. A puppet on strings. Isaac didn't speak, he lunged. A blur of speed and fury. But Lucas was faster. He moved in a clean, efficient blur, not wasting a fraction of energy. One step forward, a sharp pivot, and his fist snapped outward with clinical precision. Not brute strength, just the exact force needed. His knuckles struck Isaac's jaw with the crack of thunder on stone. Isaac's head whipped to the side, and his body crumpled, unconscious before he hit the ground. The forest stilled again. Breathing steady, Lucas turned, his focus immediately shifting back to Malia. She was crouched low, one hand pressed against her side. Blood darkened her shirt, the wound stubbornly slow to close. The claws went deep, she said, her voice tight with restrained pain. Her jaw was set, her words forced steady through clenched teeth. It's taking time. But I'll be fine. I'll be back on my feet in no time. Lucas knelt beside her, his sharp gaze flicking over the wound, making sure. A pause lingered between them, heavy with what almost happened. Then Malia broke it, her voice quieter this time. Thank you. If you hadn't rushed back. Lucas simply nodded, refusing to let the weight of her words sink in. Instead, his eyes drifted back toward the trees, the direction the figure had vanished into. His jaw tightened. Malia followed his gaze. Her lips curled back into a snarl. That bastard's playing with us. Lucas shook his head, voice low. No. He wasn't here to play. He was here to watch. He never expected to get caught. The figure was gone. But its damage lingered. Chapter 113, Twisted Rage. Lucas and Malia remained in the small clearing right next to Isaac, motionless and quiet. The forest, once a cacophony of chaos, had fallen back into uneasy stillness, the kind that doesn't feel like peace, but rather a held breath. Birds hadn't yet returned to the trees. Even the wind seemed reluctant to stir the leaves. And yet, the tension lingered, thick and cloying like smoke that wouldn't quite clear. The aftermath of what had just happened clung to the air like fog. After a short while, Isaac stirred. A low groan escaped his lips as he rolled onto his side, wincing as if every part of his body ached. He brought a shaky hand to his head, his fingers pressing into his temples. His eyelids fluttered, unfocused at first, then blinked several times as the world began to sharpen around him. Slowly, with effort, he pushed himself upright, brushing off the dead leaves and bits of dirt that clung to his clothes. I had the weirdest nightmare, he murmured, his voice thick with confusion. His gaze drifted across the clearing as he tried to orient himself, his hands absently patting down his shirt. Then he saw Malia. Or more specifically, he saw the torn remnants of her shirt, the ragged slashes of fabric, stained dark with blood. The place where claws had torn into her, too precise and brutal to be anything but real. Isaac froze. Every bit of color drained from his face, replaced by a pale, almost sickly hue. His body went rigid, and his breath caught in his throat. That wasn't a dream, was it? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. Malia met his gaze steadily. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. She just nodded once. A simple confirmation. A quiet truth that carried the weight of everything that had transpired. The realization hit Isaac like a blow to the chest. His shoulders slumped forward as the guilt settled heavily onto him, dragging him down. His eyes dropped to the dirt between his knees, jaw tightening as if he were trying to hold something inside, regret, shame, disbelief. Maybe all three. But before he could sink further into that spiral, before the guilt could fully consume him, Lucas stepped in. He moved with purpose, stepping closer and laying a firm, grounding hand on Isaac's shoulder. Now isn't the time to beat yourself up, Lucas said, voice steady, cutting through the fog of shame like a blade. We need answers. We need to understand what that person did to you. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything you remember. Isaac hesitated. His mouth opened, then closed again. The guilt hadn't left, it clung stubbornly to his expression, but he nodded, slowly, and began to speak. At first, his voice trembled, tentative, as if the words hurt to say. But as he continued, the memory took shape, and his voice grew firmer, more certain. I don't even know when it started, he said. I thought I was fine. I was fine. Then all of a sudden, it hit me. This memory, out of nowhere. That first full moon. When Malia suggested chaining me up, so I wouldn't hurt anyone. His eyes flicked up to meet hers, and for a moment, the pain there was raw and naked. I knew you were just trying to help. I know that. But when the memory came back, it didn't feel that way. It felt wrong. Like betrayal. Like how could someone who's supposed to care about me treat me like an animal? He exhaled sharply, voice thick with emotion. And it got worse. That feeling didn't stop. It twisted inside me. I couldn't think straight. It was like the anger was alive. Like it wasn't just in my head anymore, it was in my blood. It took over. All I could feel was rage. He paused, swallowed hard. And then, the idea just clicked. Like it made perfect sense. Like it was the only logical next step. His voice dropped to a near whisper. I had to kill you. A silence fell over the clearing. It was heavy and terrible, the kind of silence that swallows everything else. Isaac's breathing grew ragged, his chest rising and falling as he wrestled with the horror of his own words. Across from him, Malia stood perfectly still, the blood still visible on her shirt, a stark reminder of how close they'd come to tragedy. Then she moved. Hey. Her voice was sharp, decisive. Not angry, anchoring. That wasn't you, she said firmly. That bastard was in your head. Twisting things. She grabbed the hem of her torn shirt and tugged it aside, revealing the smooth, unblemished skin underneath. Look, she said. I'm healed. It's like it never even happened. I'm fine, Isaac. Isaac looked at the place where he had wounded her. The physical evidence was gone, erased by supernatural healing, but the emotional weight remained. He gave a slow nod, acknowledging her words, though they didn't seem to lift the burden from his shoulders. The guilt remained, a silent companion behind his eyes. Lucas's voice cut through, clear and sharp. That means he isn't just making people angry. He's taking small things, slights, doubts, annoyances, and twisting them until there's nothing left but murderous rage. Isaac and Malia both turned toward him, their expressions darkening as the full implications settled over them. The truth of it sank in, dark and heavy, like the woods themselves had gone colder around them. Chapter 114. Paper. Beacon Hills Animal Clinic. The clinic was steeped in a heavy, almost sterile quiet, the kind of silence that felt deliberate. The only sound that broke it was the low, steady hum of Deaton's equipment, machines running somewhere in the back room, a faint vibration against the tile floor. The faint scent of antiseptic hung in the air, sharp enough to sting the nose, mingling with the earthy smell of herbs stacked neatly in glass jars along the walls. Derek sat propped up on the treatment table, his back resting against the cold metal frame. The color had returned to his face since last night, he was no longer that pale, sweat-slick version of himself. His shirt was tugged back on, though the way his fingers moved, slower than usual, deliberate, gave him away. He was better, yes, but still not quite back to normal. Laura stood a few feet away near the counter, her posture stiff, arms folded across her chest as if she were holding herself together. Her gaze wasn't really on anything in the room, she stared through the rows of vials and instruments as though the counter itself was 1,000 miles away. She'd only just ended a call with Malia, the words still ringing in her head, fast and frantic, too much to process at once. A figure, she said at last, breaking the silence. Her voice was low but steady, a thread pulled taut. Someone out there turning people into weapons. Hunters, now Isaac. Whoever this is, they're escalating. Derek let out a sharp exhale, the sound almost a snarl. He rubbed the back of his neck. Great. As if the Argent's breathing down our necks wasn't enough. His tone was edged with sarcasm, biting, but his eyes betrayed something else, unease, maybe even fear he didn't want to name. Laura turned to him, her jaw tightening, her expression sharpening as if she were forcing herself to stay calm. This isn't just about the Argents anymore, she said. If this person can manipulate anyone, they can drive wedges everywhere, inside our family, between us and allies, between the hunters themselves. Behind the counter, Deaton had been quiet until then, sorting through vials with his usual precision, glass clinking softly against glass. He didn't look up when he finally spoke, his voice measured but tinged with something dark. Anger is one of the easiest levers to pull in a human mind. But to twist it that completely, he paused, shaking his head as though the thought unsettled him. This isn't ordinary influence. It's targeted. Sharpened. Like a scalpel. Derek leaned forward slightly. So what are we dealing with? A warlock. Some new kind of corrupted monster no one's ever catalogued. Deaton finally looked at him, his eyes steady but unreadable. I can't answer that yet, he admitted. But if this person continues, you won't just have hunters at your door, you'll have friends turning on each other. The words landed like a weight, and for a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the equipment grew louder in the silence, or maybe it just felt that way. Laura was the one to break it, her voice hard now but controlled. We need to get ahead of this, she said. Whoever it is, they're not hiding in the shadows anymore. They're making moves. And if we don't stop them soon, we'll be too busy fighting each other to fight them. Derek met her eyes and gave a grim nod, the faintest hint of shared resolve in his expression. Then we should start with Edward Wallace and the other hunter. If that person used them once, they might be the key to finding more information. Laura met his eyes. For once, brother and sister were on the same page. Deaton only muttered, almost to himself, as he set a vial back into its place with a soft click. But the real danger may not be who this figure is, it's how many more they can bend before you get to them. The words hung in the sterile clinic air like a warning bell. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Lucas steered the car down the winding road, headlights cutting clean paths through the dusk. But the entire time, part of him was elsewhere. Remembering the figure watching them from just beyond the tree line. What he did to Isaac. His phone buzzed against the console, breaking Lucas out of his thoughts. He picked it up and saw Erica flashing across the screen. He answered, voice relaxed. Hey yourself, Erica replied, her tone light but a touch hesitant, like she was testing the waters. They traded a few lines of harmless small talk, school gossip, and latest antics. Then her voice shifted. So, you finished the history paper yet? Lucas blinked, one hand tightening on the wheel. Paper. The one due tomorrow. Revolutionary War, 10 pages. Erica laughed softly, though it came out a little nervous. Don't tell me you forgot. Lucas groaned. Yeah, I forgot. Completely. Well, lucky for you, I didn't. Her tone picked up, playful, but there was a warmth underneath. Why don't you come over? I'll help you get it done before you completely tank your grade. Lucas chuckled. You'd do that. Thanks, Erica. You're a lifesaver. There was a tiny pause on her end, just long enough to betray the smile forming on her face. Yeah, well, don't get used to it. You owe me a meal for this. Lucas, oblivious to the shift in her tone, replied easily, deal. Lunch on me, next time. Erica's voice softened without her meaning to. Good. It's a date then. But she quickly added, I mean, not like a date, just, whatever. Right, Lucas said, completely missing the hesitation, his focus on traffic. I'll be there in 15. See you soon. The call clicked off, leaving Erica staring at her screen, biting her lip, cheeks warm. Lucas meanwhile turned the car around, completely unaware of her growing crush, his mind already shifting to how fast he could hammer out a history paper with her help. The night air thickened around the car as he steered toward Erica's house. Chapter 115. Paper. Lucas eased his car to a stop along the curb in front of a familiar, well-kept two-story house tucked into a quiet residential street. The front lawn was small but neatly trimmed, framed by a short white fence and a row of late-blooming flowers that added a splash of color to the early evening. He turned off the engine, took a steadying breath, and climbed out, smoothing his shirt and casting a quick glance at himself in the side mirror before making his way toward the front door. He hadn't even raised his hand to knock when the door opened ahead of him. Standing in the doorway was a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Erica, same bright, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in more than they let on, but with faint lines around the corners, the kind etched not just by time, but by worry. Her posture was composed, but her eyes held a weariness, the kind that settles in slowly when you've had to care too long and too hard. Lucas, right? She asked, her tone gentle and inviting, though there was a curious edge to her voice, as if she were still trying to decide what she thought of him. Yes, ma'am, Lucas replied, offering a friendly, easygoing smile. Thank you for letting me come by. The moment she saw his expression, something in her demeanor shifted. Her features softened, and her hands came together in front of her chest, half grateful, half nervous, as though she had been rehearsing what to say. So you're the boy who caught my daughter in gym class, she said, a touch of wonder in her voice. Erica told me all about it. She said if you hadn't been there when she fell, she might have. Her voice faltered, and she shook her head, blinking back a thought she clearly didn't want to finish. Well, it doesn't matter now. Thank you. Truly. Lucas looked down, modestly rubbing the back of his neck, a little flustered by the sudden praise. Honestly, it wasn't anything big. Just instinct. I think anyone would have done the same. His voice was sincere, humble. And something in it must have resonated with her, because she studied him for another second, eyes narrowing slightly in silent evaluation. Then she gave a small, approving nod and stepped back into the house. Come in, dear, she said warmly. Erica's upstairs. Second door on the right. I'll bring you two something to snack on. Lucas thanked her and stepped inside, the familiar scent of clean laundry and something sweet baking in the oven washing over him. He moved quietly through the hallway and up the carpeted stairs, his hand trailing lightly along the banister. At the top, he found the room, its door slightly ajar, and knocked softly before nudging it open. Inside, Erica sat cross-legged on her bed, her attention split between an open laptop and a spread of papers scattered across the comforter. She wore a hoodie a size too big, sleeves pushed up, glasses slipping slightly down her nose. The room around her was unexpectedly vibrant and full of personality. Movie posters covered the walls, bold, colorful prints of sci-fi adventures, caped heroes mid-flight, and old-school fantasy landscapes. On one side of the room stood a tall bookcase overflowing with paperbacks, game cases, DVDs, and rows of meticulously arranged figurines. Beneath the TV was a gaming console, clearly well-used, and a small stack of notebooks beside it. The room had the feeling of a lived-in sanctuary, one carefully curated by someone who had learned to build her world within four walls. Lucas paused in the doorway, taking it all in. He hadn't known what to expect. He realized now, maybe he hadn't expected anything, but this felt like a reflection of Erica he hadn't yet seen. He smiled faintly. If she doesn't get to go out much, he thought, she brought the world in here instead. Hey, came Erica's voice, pulling him from his thoughts. She glanced up from her laptop, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her tone was casual, almost practiced, but the faintest blush touched her cheeks when she saw him standing there. Come in. Sit anywhere, just don't mess up my notes. Lucas stepped in and gently shut the door behind him. He moved to the desk, sliding into the chair while she shifted on the bed to organize the papers, clearing a bit of space. A few moments later, her mother peeked in, balancing a tray filled with snacks, 2 glasses of juice, a bowl of chips, and a plate of cookies that still steamed slightly. She smiled as she set it down on the bedside table, her eyes flicking between the two of them with quiet approval before she left them alone again. Once the door closed, Erica adjusted her glasses and slid a paper toward him, a smirk forming on her lips. All right, rookie, she said with mock seriousness. Here's the outline. I already handled the hard stuff. You just have to pretend you know what you're doing and try not to fall behind. Lucas chuckled and picked up a pen. Guess I'll do my best not to drag down the team, then. She rolled her eyes in exaggerated exasperation, but her smile lingered as she leaned closer. The two of them bent over the pages together, their shoulders nearly brushing. Papers rustled under their hands, the soft hum of the laptop filled the quiet, and the warm light from the desk lamp cast a golden glow across their workspace. To Lucas, it felt like just another school paper, one of many he'd have to get through this semester. But to Erica, every accidental brush of his hand against hers, every shared laugh over awkward wording or silly typos, carried a different kind of weight. For her, this wasn't just homework, it was the beginning of something fragile and important, unfolding one small, hopeful moment at a time. Chapter 116. Margins and Moments. The history paper sat half-finished between them, but the air had shifted. At first, Lucas read paragraphs and scribbled notes with his usual focus, yet soon their rhythm slowed. Erica, who had been quietly reviewing her own notes, leaned forward slightly to glance at what he was writing. Her hair, loose and just slightly frizzy from the humidity, brushed lightly against his arm. It was a small touch, accidental, but it startled something in her, like crossing a line she hadn't realized was there until she touched it. You've got good handwriting, she said, aiming for casual, but her voice came out softer than she expected, more careful, more deliberate. There was an undertone she hadn't intended to let slip, but once it was out, she didn't try to reel it back in. Lucas looked up, eyebrows raised slightly in surprise. Thanks. I guess I've never really thought about it. She gave a short, almost embarrassed laugh, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Trust me, she said, smiling now, I've seen my fair share of essays that look like they were written by caffeine-fueled raccoons. Yours is practically calligraphy by comparison. Lucas smirked and shook his head, jotting another sentence. Well, I'll consider that my greatest academic achievement. She smiled at that, but as he looked down again, her gaze lingered a beat longer than it should have. There was something quietly magnetic about him when he was focused like this, the way his brow furrowed slightly, how he tapped the pen against his chin when he was thinking. She hadn't noticed these things before, not really. Or maybe she had, and just hadn't let herself dwell on them. The room fell into a companionable quiet after that, broken only by the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint hum of traffic beyond the window. Pens scratched paper again, but the energy had shifted, gentler now, warmer. After a while, Lucas reached absent-mindedly toward the plate of cookies they'd been sharing. At the same moment, Erica reached for one, too. Their hands brushed, briefly, lightly, and both pulled back like they'd touched something too hot. Sorry, Lucas muttered, his voice low and slightly awkward. No, it's fine, Erica replied quickly, her voice a notch softer than before. She looked down at her lap, trying to act nonchalant, but the flush that rose to her cheeks betrayed her. She could feel it blooming, warm and impossible to ignore. Lucas, completely unaware of the storm he'd stirred, nudged the plate toward her. Go ahead, he said, flashing a half smile. You probably need the sugar more than I do, you're carrying this whole thing. That earned a quiet laugh, genuine and warm. They continued, Lucas occasionally asking questions, Erica explaining with a spark in her voice. It struck him how alive she seemed here, in her space. Not the quiet girl at school, but someone sharp, funny, and, well, comfortable. At one point, Lucas leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. History's messy. Every side thinks they're the good guys. Exactly, Erica replied, eyes lighting up. That's why it matters who tells the story. Power decides the version that gets remembered. Lucas looked at her then, really looked. That's, actually a good point. Better than anything in this paper. Erica blinked, surprised by the compliment. Thanks, she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. She looked away, biting her lip to hide the smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. The rest of their session blurred into a softer rhythm, an easy back and forth of ideas, half-serious banter, and shared silences that didn't feel awkward anymore. Erica found herself leaning in closer without realizing it, and more than once, she caught herself smiling when Lucas wasn't paying attention. She wondered if he could feel the shift too, or if it was just her, caught in this new awareness of him. By the time the paper was done, the sky outside her window had gone dark. When they finally finished the paper, Lucas let out a long breath and stretched again, arching his back with a groan. "We actually pulled it off," he said, sounding almost surprised. "Thanks, Erica. Seriously. I couldn't have done this without you." Erica's heart squeezed, a tight and unexpected feeling that made her chest ache just a little. "Anytime," she said, and this time she meant it with her whole heart. Lucas smiled at her then, not distracted or polite, but real. It was the kind of smile that stayed with you after someone left. He began packing up his notes and books, and the quiet sounds of zippers and shuffling papers filled the space between them. Erica watched him, her fingers absently fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. She tried to keep her expression neutral, tried not to show how much she didn't want the night to end just yet. But inside, something tugged at her, an odd mix of satisfaction and sadness, like the closing of a really good book. He stood, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "I'll see you at school." "Yeah," she said, forcing a smile, though her voice caught just slightly. "See you." And just like that, he was gone. The room felt a little quieter without him in it. Chapter 117. Choice. Lucas's perspective. The road stretched before him, quiet and endlessly empty, a ribbon of asphalt swallowed by night. The headlights carved out only a fraction of the darkness, twin beams cutting two pale tunnels through the void. Beyond that light, the world might as well have ceased to exist, and in a way, it felt as though it had. Lucas kept his hands steady on the wheel, though the grip was tighter than it needed to be, his fingers stiff, knuckles pale. He was driving, yes, steady, controlled, but his mind was far from this lonely stretch of highway. His thoughts spun elsewhere, circling a single name. Erica. He could still see the image of her tonight, etched so vividly into his brain it was as if she were sitting there in the passenger seat. The way she'd leaned forward, laughter spilling into the somewhat cramped corner of her room, her eyes alight in a way he rarely saw within the gray halls of school. She'd smiled more in those few hours than he had ever witnessed before, unguarded, radiant, her pale features brightened by something fierce and genuine. She'd been different tonight. Not changed, exactly, but more alive. Animated. She leaned over the table as they went over history notes, tossing out quick jokes and clever observations, fingers dancing as she pointed out key passages. Her voice had lifted and soared with a strange kind of joy, defying everything he knew about her condition. For a little while, she'd seemed untouched by it all. But he couldn't erase the details that lingered in the margins, the truths she didn't mean for him to see. The faint rasp in her breaths when she laughed too hard. The brief, flickering tremor in her fingers as she passed him a pen, subtle but undeniable. She hid it well, so well that most people probably missed it. But Lucas had noticed. He always noticed. And the memory of it clung to him, heavy and immovable, like a stone lodged in his chest. It haunted him, that contrast. That she could be so full of life on the outside, while slowly losing a quiet war inside. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. In the show, it was different. In the show, she'd been someone else entirely, bitten, turned, reborn. No longer fragile, no longer bound to a body that betrayed her. Strong. Fast. Fearless. That fantasy mocked him now, because he knew with brutal clarity, this wasn't a TV show. This world did not hand out miracles without a price. Fiction had a way of lying. Of romanticizing what, in truth, was nothing short of a gamble with death. In the real world, you didn't always get a second act. And the numbers, God, the numbers didn't lie. 50% chance for a healthy adult, they said. A coin flip. If you were young and strong, maybe the odds climbed to 70. Even 80, for the luckiest of the lucky. But Erica, whose body was already frayed and failing. Someone who took each breath like it might be borrowed. 1%. Maybe 2. If the stars aligned and the universe decided, for once, not to be cruel, 5. 5%. 5%. The number echoed inside his skull like a drumbeat he couldn't silence. Louder than the steady thrum of the car. Louder than the wind rushing past the windows. 5%. A number so small it barely felt real, and yet so heavy it threatened to crush him. His grip tightened around the wheel, knuckles paling. Was he really considering this? Was he really thinking of offering her that kind of chance, if you could even call it that? And yet, how could he not? Her laughter echoed in memory again, so real it seemed to fill the car. She had life in her like wildfire, and yet her own body dragged her down in chains. She didn't deserve this slow unraveling. She didn't deserve to fade. She deserved something more. A chance to run, to fight, to feel strength in her bones instead of weakness. To live, not just survive. But what was 5%? A lifeline or a noose? Was it possibility, or was it cruelty masquerading as hope? From afar, estate lights flickered into view, faint halos breaking the horizon. The sight snapped him back into the present, just enough to slow the car, to make the familiar turn down the long drive. Yet his mind refused to quiet. The thoughts remained, as tangled as ever, tightened like knots around his chest. 5%. Could he bear the weight of that decision if it meant losing her? Or worse, could he live with himself if he did nothing, and watched her slip away anyway? Lucas eased the car to a stop at the end of the drive. He cut the engine, the lights blinked out, and the silence poured in. It pressed against him, heavy and unyielding, leaving him alone with nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat. Lucas sat there, unmoving, staring through the windshield at nothing. The question hung heavy in the air, impossible to outrun. 5%. To try, or not to try. And which choice would break him more? Chapter 118. Paper. The next day. The morning inside the Argent household carried with it a stillness that seemed almost deliberate, as though the air itself had chosen to hold its breath. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies the smallest of sounds until they feel sharp against the ears. Outside, birds chattered briskly from the branches, their song weaving against shafts of sunlight that pierced through the blinds in clean, narrow bars of gold. Dust motes floated lazily within those beams, drifting in and out of the light like suspended fragments of time. Chris Argent padded across the polished wooden floor, his robe pulled tight against the early chill. He opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The world outside was deceptively calm, dew clung to the grass, the neighborhood still lay in half-slumber, and somewhere a dog barked distantly in lazy protest. Chris bent down, picked up the freshly delivered paper, still smelling faintly of ink, folded neatly as always. He tucked it under his arm and went back inside. The smell of freshly brewed coffee greeted him, dark, rich, familiar. His wife was already seated at the kitchen table, one leg tucked beneath her, cradling her mug in both hands. She gave him a small smile, the kind exchanged between people who've shared decades together, and returned her gaze to the morning light filtering through the window. Chris took his seat across from her, unfolded the front page, and began scanning across columns of headlines with the practiced indifference of a man who rarely expected the truth to be found in printed words. Politics, economics, accidents, scandals, the details passed over his eyes without settling in his mind. Then something caught his attention, not in the headlines, but in the feel of the paper itself. His fingers paused, sensing a subtle irregularity, something foreign tucked between the familiar pages. It was a stiffness in the fold, a slight resistance, as though the paper were guarding a secret. He reached in carefully, extracting a single, smooth sheet that had been slipped between the pages with deliberate precision. There were no markings on the outside, no name, no sender, nothing to suggest origin or intent. Just a blank surface that somehow felt loaded with meaning. He unfolded it carefully. His eyes fixed on the words, short and knife-like in their bluntness. Isaac Leahy and Lucas Lockwood are werewolves. They work with the Hales. They killed Andrew. 3 short sentences. No preamble. No signature. Just a blunt statement of accusation, clear, direct, and devastating. It hit him like a blade, cold and sharp, slicing through the calm of the morning in a single stroke. Across the table, his wife looked up, her brow furrowing at the sudden shift in his expression. "What is it?" she asked, voice still soft, but edged with concern. Chris didn't answer right away. He simply handed the note across the table, watching her face as she read it once, then again. He saw the change, the slow tightening of her features, the way her fingers gripped the paper a little too tightly. She looked up at him, troubled. Could it be true? Chris leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly as he stared out the window, mind already sifting through weeks of half-truths, strange encounters, and all the things that never added up neatly. He had known something was off about Isaac Leahy for a while now, heard the unusual rumors, seen the unease he stirred in others. Lucas Lockwood was newer, quieter, harder to pin down, but the company he kept had always raised questions. "It's possible," Chris said finally, voice low. "Those 2 boys, they're always around Malia Hale at school. Practically attached to her. And Isaac, there's been talk. Unverified, sure, but persistent. There's something there." His wife's eyes were distant, thinking. Allison's mentioned this Isaac before, she said after a moment. I think she likes him. If what this note says is true, she trailed off, the unspoken implications weighing heavily in the pause. I don't know how she'd take it. Chris exhaled slowly, folding the paper back along its original crease as if that act alone might offer clarity. But it didn't. If anything, the room felt colder now, heavier. The once routine morning had curdled into something darker, something uncertain. At last, he exhaled. This feels like bait. Deliberate. Someone wants us looking in that direction. But bait or not, we can't dismiss it. Andrew's death hangs over us still like unfinished business. And if Isaac and Lucas are truly involved, he tightened his jaw. We'll have to uncover the truth ourselves. His wife lowered her gaze, nodding, though something reluctant lingered in her expression. The kitchen, once softened by warmth and light and the promise of breakfast, replaced by a creeping chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Outside, the birds still sang, oblivious. But inside the house, something had shifted. A question had been asked, and neither of them could ignore it now. And on the table, the folded paper sat like a spark waiting for kindling. Chapter 119, Anonymous. A few hours later. The Hale house stood in silence, a ghost of what it once was compared to 6 years ago. The morning sun filtered through the glass windows, scattering golden slivers across the time-worn wooden floors. Dust motes floated in the beams of light, dancing lazily in the quiet, undisturbed air. The house felt frozen in time, holding its breath. That fragile stillness shattered when the crunch of tires on gravel echoed outside, sharp and sudden against the hush. Laura moved to the front window, every muscle tightening as the shape of a black and white cruiser came into view. Even before she recognized the seal of the sheriff's department on the door, her jaw set. Routine patrols didn't come this far out. This was a visit, deliberate and pointed. From the vehicle stepped Sheriff Stilinski, familiar in both presence and posture, with a younger deputy trailing a step behind him. They moved with the quiet, confident purpose of men used to carrying authority into uneasy places. There was no banging on the door, no barked commands. Just a polite knock, firm, respectful, but the weight behind it couldn't be mistaken. Laura inhaled once, shallow and sharp, then pulled the door open with an edge of practiced caution, her arms crossing over her chest like armor. Sheriff, she greeted curtly, her voice tight. Laura, Stilinski returned with a nod that was both cordial and measured. His expression was unreadable, as always. We need to speak with Derek. Just a few questions regarding Andrew Smith's death. Laura's eyes narrowed instantly, her posture stiffening even more. Shouldn't our lawyers be present for this? Stilinski didn't flinch. He lifted a hand, an old gesture meant to reassure, even if it rarely worked. Derek's not a suspect, he said, his tone calm, rehearsed. This isn't an interrogation. We're not here to accuse, just to get a clearer picture of what happened to Andrew. Before Laura could respond, a low voice called from deeper in the house. Gravelly, controlled. Let them in. Derek stepped into view behind his sister, expression unreadable, shoulders squared. He looked tired, older than he should have, weariness sitting deep in the lines of his face. Reluctantly, Laura stepped aside, allowing the sheriff and his deputy to enter. The moment they crossed the threshold, the atmosphere inside shifted. The house, already too quiet, seemed to shrink around them. Their uniforms made the space feel smaller, more suffocating. The deputy, a man in his 30s with sharp eyes and a rigid jawline, set a tablet down on the scarred coffee table. With a swipe, the screen came to life, casting a dull glow in the dim room. Grainy black and white footage played, a parking lot under dim streetlights, timestamped and tagged. A familiar car came into view, the angle catching its sleek frame as it pulled out of a parking space. The footage wasn't pristine, but it didn't have to be. Every curve of the vehicle was unmistakable. The deputy turned the screen toward Derek, his tone clipped. Mr. Hale, is this your car? Yes, Derek answered, voice steady. No hesitation. No denial. The deputy tapped the screen again, pausing it on a specific frame. The vehicle's hood caught the streetlight just right, gleaming. Wet. Not rain. Something thicker. Darker. Then you'll also confirm, the deputy continued, that what we're seeing here, this sheen on the hood, is blood. The victim's blood. Derek's jaw tightened. He didn't look away from the image. Yes, he said after a pause. But I had nothing to do with that guy's death. When I got back to my car, the body was already there. Laid out on the hood. The deputy frowned. And your first instinct wasn't to call emergency services. To report what you found. I panicked, Derek replied, flatly. His voice carried no emotion, but the shame was there, just beneath the surface. I didn't know what to do. So I moved the body. I drove away. The deputy raised an eyebrow, voice sharpening. That's not exactly the response of an innocent man, is it? Laura, who had been standing silent at her brother's side, stepped forward sharply. Her expression was fierce, protective. And what is a normal reaction, exactly? You think my brother murdered someone and left the body like that? Stilinski's calm gaze met hers, weighted but without hostility. Slowly, he shook his head. No. The coroner's report was clear. Andrew's injuries were not man-made. They were consistent with animal attacks. Laura's voice took on an edge, cool and controlled. Then why are you in our home? Questioning him like a suspect. Because, Stilinski said quietly, we're trying to understand the timeline. We're trying to fill in the blanks. Andrew was a resident of this town, a new one but still, he had friends, family. People who deserve answers. And when Derek left the scene without reporting it, it complicated everything. Laura's arms crossed tighter. He panicked. He made a bad call. That doesn't make him guilty of anything. The sheriff gave a measured nod, motioned to his deputy, and turned toward the door. The weight of the visit seemed to lift slightly, until Laura's voice cut through the air. One more thing, Sheriff. How did you even know that was Derek's car? It's not registered under his name, it belongs to the Hale Family Trust. Stilinski hesitated. Then, with the reluctant honesty of a man who owed her at least that much, he said. We got an anonymous tip. Said Derek was involved in Andrew's death. That hung in the room like smoke. Laura's eyes narrowed further, suspicion crackling behind them. Anonymous tip, she repeated flatly. The sheriff gave her a final nod, then left with his deputy. The cruiser pulled away, its tires kicking up dust that shimmered in the sunlight. Laura stood in the doorway, arms tight across her chest, watching until the car disappeared down the road. Inside, Derek sat back heavily, jaw tight, eyes shadowed. The anonymous tip wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was someone out there, deliberately tightening the noose around them. Chapter 120. Watch. After school. The forest pulsed with life, but not the peaceful kind that came with wind in the leaves or birdsong overhead. This was a different rhythm, fast, sharp, violent. Twigs cracked under hurried feet. Breaths came in short, ragged bursts. The sound of fists hitting flesh rang out through the trees like drumbeats of a storm. Isaac grunted, lifted a hand to his mouth, and wiped away the smear of blood from his lip. His jaw throbbed, but the pain only fueled him. With a low growl vibrating in his throat, Isaac charged forward again, unrelenting. Keep your stance low, Malia barked, her voice cutting clean through the sounds of the fight. She ducked his wild swing effortlessly and used his momentum against him, twisting and slamming him into the forest floor with one clean shove. You keep leaving yourself wide open. Face pressed to the earth, Isaac let out a frustrated groan. Leaves clung to his hair as he pushed himself up again, brushing dirt from his arms. He exhaled hard and looked at her through narrowed eyes. Easy for you to say, he muttered. You've had years to figure this out. I've had, what? A few weeks. She cocked her head, something like a smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Then learn faster. There was a challenge in her voice, but something else too, expectation. Maybe even belief. The words stung, but they stayed with him, sinking in like roots. Neither of them had any idea they were being watched. Concealed behind thick brush and shadow 100 yards away, two figures crouched low to the ground, their presence masked by experience and intention. Both moved with the quiet certainty of trained predators. One of them raised a pair of high-powered binoculars to his eyes, tracking every move between the sparring pair with clinical focus. The other had his phone out already, thumb hovering for a beat before tapping a contact. The call connected on the first ring. Chris, it's confirmed, the man said quietly, barely above a whisper. Isaac Leahy is definitely a wolf. The other one, Lucas, we're still digging into. Could go either way, but the odds are high he's one too. The voice on the other end was still for a long breath. When Chris Argent finally spoke, it was measured and cold. Stay on Isaac. Watch him. When the opportunity comes, take him alive. I have questions for the boy. Yes, sir. The hunter ended the call with a tap, lowering the phone but keeping his eyes fixed through the trees. Watching. Waiting. Hours passed. The sun sank below the horizon, dragging the day with it. Darkness crept in to fill the silence, thickening in corners and under eaves like something alive. Inside the Leahy house, Isaac sat alone, the stillness pressing down around him. The walls, though familiar, felt like they were inching closer. The quiet wasn't comforting. It was heavy. Suffocating. He shifted in his seat, his body still aching from the afternoon's training, but that wasn't what had him uneasy. Something was off. His skin prickled with a sense that had nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with instinct, Wolfson's. The kind that whispered warnings before the mind had a chance to catch up. Slowly, Isaac rose and moved toward the door. He stepped out onto the porch, his bare feet brushing against the cool boards as he scanned the yard with golden-hued eyes, alert and searching. Everything looked still. But the quiet was wrong. The trees beyond the fence were darker than they should have been, the shadows deeper. And then, something moved. A flicker of air. A sharp whisper through the silence. Instinct kicked in hard. Isaac's hand shot out, fast as lightning, fingers closing around something small and cold. A dart. He stared at it for half a second before his pulse spiked. His claws extended with a metallic sound, slicing from his fingertips as his eyes blazed bright gold. The low growl that built in his chest was no longer frustration, it was the sound of a predator ready for war. From the edge of the tree line, two figures burst forward like unleashed hounds. Hunters. Armed. Trained. Isaac moved. He collided with the first one head-on, his momentum driving them both across the lawn. His claws slashed, sparks flying as they scraped against the hunter's metal weapon. The second attacker was already there, striking fast, forcing Isaac to spin and duck as a baton narrowly missed his skull. It was chaos, fast, brutal, unrelenting. But Isaac fought like his life depended on it. Because it did. He moved with speed and power, his strikes fierce and furious. A well-aimed kick sent one of the hunters sprawling, skidding across the grass with a grunt. But the other didn't give him space to breathe. He pressed in, relentless, every movement designed not to kill, but to wear Isaac down. They were coordinated. Trained for this. One feinted, the other struck. Isaac tore through them with desperation, but they moved as a unit. One took his attention, the other attacked the opening. It was like fighting shadows that never tired. Minutes dragged like hours. Sweat streamed into Isaac's eyes, mixing with blood from a cut on his brow. His breath came ragged, his strength flagging. Pain screamed through his side as a baton landed hard against his ribs, sending him flying into the porch railing. Wood cracked beneath his weight. He tried to push himself up, vision swimming. A heavy boot slammed into his chest, pinning him. His limbs strained, his body howling in protest, but he couldn't move. He saw the hunter raise his weapon, metal glinting in the porch light. The blow to the side of his head was the last thing he felt. But just before the dark took him, Isaac's eyes flicked to the tree line. There, half hidden in the shadows, the mysterious figure stood, watching silently. Watching him fall. And then everything went black. Chapter 121, Irreversible. The night held its breath, unnaturally still, as if even the wind feared to disturb what had just happened. Not a single leaf rustled. Not a single bird called. The silence stretched unnervingly across the desolate road like a shroud. At the edge of the darkened highway, a car lay broken, its frame twisted and skewed awkwardly against the base of a thick tree. The hood was a mangled mess of metal, steam and smoke curling from beneath it in lazy tendrils, coiling up into the night air like ghosts too tired to rise. The windshield was fractured into 1,000 jagged veins, as though the vehicle itself had gone blind in the violence of the crash. Inside the ruined car, the silence was even heavier, thick, suffocating. Not just the stillness of night, but the kind that comes after chaos. After screams. After something irreversible. Isaac stirred, a low groan escaping his throat before he even opened his eyes. Pain bloomed in his skull like firecrackers, sharp, relentless, and disorienting. His head throbbed with the deep, aching pulse of trauma. Every breath brought the sour tang of gasoline and the harsher stench of scorched rubber and blood. He gagged on the air but couldn't stop breathing it in. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. His mind grasped at shadows, fragments. The world around him was a blur of crushed leather seats, splintered glass, and the faint glow of moonlight filtering through a spiderweb of cracks in the windshield. Slowly, shapes began to form. A dashboard. A rearview mirror dangling by a wire. Bodies. His vision sharpened just enough to see the two slumped figures in the front seats. The men who had attacked him. Hunters. One of them, an older man with a jaw like stone, was sagged against the steering wheel, his face turned away, neck twisted at a sickening, unnatural angle. The other sat upright only because the seatbelt held him there, chest still, mouth slightly open, eyes mercifully closed. Both were soaked in blood. It clung to their clothes in dark patches, glinting under the dim light like wet ink. Some of it had dried. Some of it hadn't. Isaac couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His hands, shaking, contorted with the remnants of a transformation he hadn't meant to trigger, rested limply at his sides. Red coated his fingers, smeared into the creases of his palms. Some of it was theirs. Some of it was his. All of it was real. He stared at the wreckage, and the only words that came out of his mouth were barely more than a whisper. What happened? The answer didn't come in words, but in flashes. A tranquilizer dart caught in his hand. Panic. A fight. Brief, brutal. He remembered lunging, claws tearing, then the final blow that sent everything spiraling into black. After that, the memories turned to color and emotion more than image. Rage. Uncontrollable, searing rage. Not his. Or not just his. A deep, unnatural fury, as though something had crawled inside him and ripped the reins from his hands. He remembered the car swerving. The wheel jerking wildly in his hands. Screams, maybe theirs, maybe his. The sharp, stomach-churning spin of metal and momentum. A tree rushing toward them far too fast. And then, impact. And blood. It didn't take much to piece the rest together. The two hunters were not expecting him to wake up this quickly. That caught them off guard, and the crash certainly didn't help the situation. Isaac knew this feeling. This aftermath. This horror. It had happened before. That mysterious person had done it again. Controlling him. Amplifying every dark instinct until there was nothing left but the urge to destroy. It had made him attack Malia. It had made him lose control. And now it had pushed him further. He had killed them. Isaac's entire body went cold, like ice water had been poured straight into his chest. His throat closed, and he gasped, lungs fluttering uselessly. Panic surged, wild and uncontainable. He fumbled with the door handle, shoved it open so hard the hinges shrieked in protest, and stumbled out into the open air. The forest that bordered the road stood still and silent, unnaturally so. No wind. No animals. Not even the sound of distant traffic. Just quiet. Terrible, oppressive quiet. Isaac leaned heavily against the side of the wrecked car, barely able to stay upright. His breathing was ragged, every inhale feeling like a punishment. Every exhale carried the taste of blood, of metal, of guilt. They were hunters. He knew that. Knew that if they'd had their way, he'd be the one lying dead in the front seat. But knowing that didn't help. It didn't undo what he'd done. It didn't erase the images burned into his memory, the fear in their eyes, the moment their lives ended. And it didn't change the fact that his hands had ended them. He took off running. Not because he had a destination in mind, he didn't. But the thought of staying still, of letting the weight settle, was unbearable. So he moved. Feet pounding against earth. Trees whipping past. The dark forest closing around him like a tunnel. But he couldn't outrun the words repeating in his head. 2 dead. 2 hunters. 2 Argent hunters. He staggered to a stop, lungs burning, as a new realization hit him like a blow to the chest. Allison. He stared blankly into the trees, horror seeping in like frostbite. She might have known them. She might have laughed with them at family gatherings, exchanged stories over coffee, shared memories. These weren't just faceless enemies, they were people. People with lives. With connections. With families. People Allison might have cared for. And now, because of him, they were gone. Even if he tried to explain, even if he told her about the influence, the manipulation, the blinding rage that wasn't entirely his own, how could he expect her to understand? How could he ask her to forgive something so monstrous? Would she even be able to look at him after this? Would she see the boy she cared about, or would she only see the thing that tore through her people like an animal out of control? He started moving again, but his pace had slowed. Each step felt heavier than the last. The trees blurred at the edges of his vision, whether from the cold or from the water in his eyes, he wasn't sure anymore. By the time he emerged at the edge of town, he was trembling. Exhausted. Hollow. He wasn't sure which he feared more. The Argents finding out what he'd done. Or Allison finding out who he'd become. Chapter 122, Silence. The Leahy house was silent. Too silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that came at night when everyone had gone to bed, nor the quiet of a house that had simply emptied for the day. This was a suffocating silence, heavy and unnatural, like the stillness of a graveyard just before a storm breaks. The walls seemed to hold their breath. The air itself felt stagnant, thick with memories and ghosts. Isaac moved through the living room like a specter pacing his own tomb. His footsteps were unsteady, almost hesitant, as though he wasn't sure if the floor would hold beneath him. His hands trembled in rhythm with the thunder in his chest. His shirt hung off him in ragged strips, torn at the seams, and the faint metallic smell of blood clung to him like smoke from a fire, except it wasn't his blood this time. He raked both hands through his hair, fingers knotting in it, pulling just enough to ground himself, but it didn't help. His breathing came too fast, shallow and uneven. What do I do? He whispered to the empty room. His voice cracked on the last word. What the hell do I do now? No answer came. Not even an echo. Only the relentless ticking of the old wall clock, each second a tiny hammer against his skull. He stumbled down the hallway, bumping into the doorframe on his way to the bathroom. The flick of the light switch felt jarring in the gloom. Cold water gushed from the tap, splashing hard against porcelain before spilling over his cupped hands. He threw it against his face, again and again, until it dripped down his neck, soaking into the collar of his torn shirt. For a moment, he didn't move. His eyes locked on the mirror above the sink. The reflection staring back at him looked wrong. The face was his, same jawline, same eyes, same freckles across the bridge of his nose, but something behind the eyes had shifted. Something sharp and dark and unrecognizable stared back. He gripped the edge of the sink until his knuckles blanched, trying to steady his breathing, but the effort only made his hands shake harder. When that failed, he dug into his pocket for his phone. His fingers were clumsy, slipping against the screen as he scrolled to one name. Lucas. He pressed call. The line clicked after 2 rings. Isaac didn't waste time. The words tumbled out of him in a broken rush. The fight, the car, the crash, the blood. All of it. His voice faltered halfway through, cracking under the weight of what he was saying, but he forced himself to finish. On the other end, Lucas was silent for several long, punishing seconds. Then his voice came, low and steady, like an anchor in a storm. Stay calm and wait there. I'm on my way. Isaac managed a quiet, almost childlike, okay, before ending the call. He drifted back into the living room, sat heavily on the couch, and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. His hands hung between them, shaking. He tried not to think about the hunters, dead now, lying somewhere at the side of the road. Tried not to picture the way it had all happened. But the images clawed at the back of his mind anyway. 10 minutes crawled by. The house seemed to grow colder with each one. Then came a knock at the door. Sharp. Certain. Isaac opened it to find Lucas standing there, steady as ever. Beside him stood Malia, her arms crossed, expression hard but her eyes soft with something like concern. Lucas spoke first. I called her after your call. Isaac just nodded and stepped aside to let them in. The 3 of them settled into the living room, but the room felt smaller now, crowded not with bodies but with tension. Malia leaned against the wall, arms still folded. Lucas positioned himself near the window, gaze unreadable. Isaac sat hunched on the couch, restless and hollow-eyed. The silence between them pressed like a weight. Lucas broke it. Are you okay? Isaac nodded automatically. I'm fine. Malia's frown deepened. Clearly you're not. She gestured at him, his torn clothes, his trembling hands. But we have more important things to worry about, like the fact that 2 Argent hunters are dead. Her words sliced the air cleanly. Isaac winced, the guilt like a fresh bruise. Lucas raised a hand. I know the situation's bad, he said, his tone calm but firm, but there's no point in tearing into each other. Malia's glare softened. She dipped her head, saying nothing. Lucas turned back to Isaac. What I need to know is, how did the Argents even find out about you? How did they know you're a werewolf? Isaac stared at the floor for a long moment before answering. His voice came out quiet but hard. When they attacked me outside my house, I saw him. That bastard. The same one who's been manipulating everyone. He was watching from the tree line. Like he knew it was going to happen. Lucas's jaw tightened. Then it's him. He knows about you, and me. And he must have told the Argents. They know it was a werewolf that killed Andrew. Malia pushed off the wall, her voice sharper now. That bastard is running around out there, trying to destroy our lives, and now, counting Andrew, 3 of the Argent hunters are dead. Lucas nodded grimly. Which means the Argents won't hold back anymore when they find out. The room fell silent again. Outside, the wind howled softly through the trees, a low, restless sound. Lucas stared out the window into the darkness, his reflection pale in the glass. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. And we still have to deal with him. The words lingered in the air, cold and certain. No one said anything else. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 123 cost. I am 15 chapters ahead on my Patreon, check it out if you are interested. Patur-e-acute on .com/emperordragon. Chapter 123. Cost. The forest seemed to hold its breath, its shadow depths caught in the harsh, unblinking glare of his car's headlights. The trees rose like silent sentinels, their twisted branches tangled overhead, dripping with rain and darkness. The light carved the gloom into pale fragments, revealing trunks slick with moisture and undergrowth that trembled beneath the weight of falling leaves. It was a mournful sight, like the woods themselves were watching, aware of the stillness that had fallen here, and grieving for it. Chris Argent stood at the edge of the wreckage, boots grinding on shattered glass scattered across the damp earth. Wet leaves clung to the soles, their edges curling and blackening. Through the thin scrim of mist, the car lay mangled against a tree that had withstood the impact without shifting an inch. Steel was folded in on itself, warped and crushed as though some unseen hand had crumpled it like paper. The windshield bore a sprawling web of cracks, each one catching the headlights with a faint glint, the fractured pattern spreading outward from the point of devastation. Inside the wreck, two of his hunters sat slumped forward, one's head bowed in a posture that, if not for the absence of breath, might have been mistaken for sleep. There was no movement, no sound, no defiance in death, only the quiet stillness of men who would not rise again. Chris did not speak, did not curse, did not allow his expression to falter. He simply stared at them, letting the silence weigh on him. Somewhere, miles away, the sheriff's people remained oblivious to what had happened here. That wasn't luck. Chris had disabled the GPS tracker on the hunter's vehicle before tracing their location himself. He had been waiting, expecting them to deliver the boy, Isaac Leahy, bound and subdued. Their failure to appear had been his first warning, this wreck was the second, and it told him everything. He stepped forward and opened the driver's door. The cold night air made room for a heavier presence, the sharp tang of blood, the bitter trace of gun oil, and the acrid stench of burned rubber. The steering wheel was twisted, bent nearly out of shape. A dart rifle lay broken in the passenger's lap, its stock snapped down the middle. Across the seats and dashboard were marks, deep, deliberate tears cutting through fabric, foam, and plastic alike. The dashboard's paneling hung in jagged shreds, clawed open by something powerful and unrelenting. Chris didn't need time to think. He recognized the pattern. Werewolf. Leaning in, he examined what remained. Tufts of coarse fur clung to seams alongside splashes of dried blood. The claw gouges in the synthetic leather gleamed faintly in the beam of his flashlight. It wasn't guesswork, it was evidence, undeniable and damning. He straightened slowly, his breath curling into the cool air, mist dissipating in the drifting wind. This was no accident. Isaac Leahy had unleashed himself here. Whether born of panic, provocation, or choice, the outcome was the same. The boy had killed two men, two hunters, trained under Chris's family, entrusted with his command. For a long moment, the forest filled the silence with faint, ghostly movements, the whisper of leaves brushing together, the muted drop of rain gathering at the tips of branches. It was as if the woods themselves mourned in quiet solidarity. Chris shut the driver's door with deliberate care, the sound barely breaking the hush. It was not an act of indifference, but of reverence, not to wake those who could never wake again. Turning away, he crossed the road to his own vehicle, its engine ticking faintly in the night air. Sliding into the driver's seat, he rested his hands on the wheel. His gaze fixed ahead, unmoving. Though his jaw tightened, his expression remained composed, a perfect mask concealing the tide churning beneath. His thoughts weighed heavy with faces, names, lives tied to him not by chance but by choice. Men whose loyalty had cost them everything. Men with families who would now answer the knock on their door. He turned the wheel, sending his headlights slicing back onto the road, twin beams cutting through the endless black light cold white blades. The wreck behind him became a fading smear of shadow, swallowed by the forest. Chris did not look back. The tires hummed over wet asphalt, carrying him away, his eyes locked on the road before him, his grief buried under the practiced iron of discipline. Yet beneath that armor, another force surged, hot, sharp, unyielding. Anger born not from loss alone, but from the certainty of what must follow. By the time the road widened toward the main highway, his voice was low and steady, the words meant for no one but himself. Isaac, he murmured, almost gently, like a promise whispered to the night. You will pay for what you have done. The vehicle rolled forward, the taillights gleaming briefly before vanishing around the bend, fading into the dark like embers lost to the wind. Chapter 124. A still house never sleeps. The Argent house was quiet when Chris pulled into the driveway. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made grief echo louder. He killed the engine, sat for a moment in the car, and stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man who looked back at him was composed, but there was a weight in his eyes, the kind that never really lifts. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and paper. His wife had been working late again at the dining table. When she saw him step through the door, she immediately set her mug down. Chris, she said softly. You're home late. Did you find them? He took off his jacket, hung it on the rack with deliberate calm, and answered without looking up. Yes. Her breath caught at his tone. And, Chris finally met her eyes. They're dead. The words landed heavy. No theatrics, no trembling. Just truth, stripped of everything else. She covered her mouth with her hand and stepped closer. Oh God, how? Car crash, he said first. Then, after a pause, caused by an attack. Her eyes widened. You mean, werewolf? He nodded once. Isaac Leahy. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Just stared at him as if trying to gauge how deep the wound ran. You're sure? I saw the marks myself, Chris said quietly. Claw wounds. Inside the car. He tore through both of them. Her shoulders sank. The boy Allison's been talking about. Chris's expression didn't waver. The same. She turned away, gripping the edge of the table. Chris, this is going to destroy her. I know. Then what are you going to do? He exhaled slowly, the weight of decades of family code pressing against his chest. What I've always done, he said. Find the truth first. His wife looked at him sharply. And if the truth is what it looks like. Chris's jaw tightened. Then I'll deal with that too. The silence stretched between them, sharp as glass. The air felt too thin, too still. After a while, she spoke again, her voice trembling. We have already lost too many people, Chris. Don't lose yourself to this too. He gave a small, tired smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. I already did. Years ago. He turned toward the staircase, but before heading up, he stopped. Don't tell Allison anything yet, he said. Not until I'm sure. His wife nodded weakly. Be careful. Chris paused, then murmured, almost to himself, careful's what got our men killed. He went upstairs, the house swallowing his footsteps. Downstairs, his wife stood alone in the kitchen's dim light, staring at the untouched mug of coffee. The steam had faded, the warmth gone, much like the night itself. Allison's perspective. Allison couldn't sleep. She'd come downstairs hoping a glass of water or a quiet moment might settle her thoughts, maybe even surprise her dad if he was still up. The house was dark, quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in. Her hair was still tousled from tossing in bed, and the faint smell of coffee drifted in from the kitchen, unexpected at this hour. Then she froze. Her parents were talking, low voices, sharp with something that didn't belong in the cold night air. She stopped halfway down the stairs, hidden behind the wall that opened into the living room. I saw the marks myself, her father's voice carried. Claw wounds. Inside the car. He tore through both of them. Her mother gasped. The boy Allison's been talking about. Allison's heartbeat stumbled. Her father's answer came slow, heavy. The same. Isaac Leahy. The world tilted. Her fingers tightened on the railing. The name rang in her ears, louder than anything else, louder than the ticking clock, louder than her mother's horrified silence. No, she mouthed to herself. Her mother's voice trembled. You're sure? Chris didn't hesitate. I'm sure. Allison pressed her back against the wall, breathing shallowly. Her chest ached, not from fear, but from something worse. Betrayal. Her father continued, voice steady but distant. Don't tell her anything yet. Not until I'm sure. That was enough. Allison slipped back up the stairs before her mother could answer. Her movements were silent, instinctive, a hunter's daughter. Once in her room, she sat down on her bed, her hands trembling. Isaac, the boy who smiled shyly in the hallways, who flinched whenever someone raised their voice, who had once told her he liked the way she laughed, killed two hunters. No. It didn't fit. It didn't make sense. She remembered the warmth in his voice when he said goodnight after their last phone call. The soft awkwardness. The gentleness. But then she remembered the other truth, her family's truth. The code. The history. Her head dropped into her hands. If her father was right, then everything she felt for Isaac, the confusion, the spark, the fragile hope, was a lie. If he was wrong, then Isaac was in danger. Allison sat there in the sliver of moonlight, the decision already forming behind the storm of her thoughts. She had to see him. She had to know the truth herself. Chapter 125, Morning. The sun was barely up when Allison parked her car down the street from Isaac's house. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, but inside her chest, her heart was still racing. She sat there for a long moment, staring through the windshield at the small, aging house. It looked ordinary, almost painfully so. The kind of place that shouldn't have anything to do with blood or hunters or death. But her father's words wouldn't leave her. He tore through both of them. Allison shut her eyes, gripping the steering wheel. She didn't want to believe it. She couldn't. Finally, she climbed out and crossed the short path to his porch. The steps creaked under her feet. She hesitated at the door, just long enough to consider turning around, before she knocked. A pause. Then footsteps. The door opened. Isaac stood there. His eyes were tired, haunted, the same soft blue she remembered, but now dulled. His hair was messy, and there was a faint cut along his jaw that hadn't quite healed yet. Allison, he breathed, startled. She tried to smile. It faltered. Hey, can I come in? Isaac hesitated, then stepped aside. Yeah, of course. The living room was dim, curtains half-drawn. She could smell coffee, maybe sweat, and something faintly metallic underneath. You look, she started, but stopped, because there wasn't a kind word that fit. I look like I haven't slept in a while. He offered, trying for humor. It fell flat. Allison nodded once. Then she looked him in the eyes and said quietly, I heard. His expression shifted, a flash of panic, then resignation. He didn't ask what she'd heard. He knew. Allison, I didn't, he began, voice rough. But she cut him off, trembling. They were my dad's people, Isaac. 2 of them. And you. I didn't want to hurt anyone. The hunters came after me. His words cracked the air between them. I didn't even know what I was doing. Someone, made me do it. Allison's eyes glistened. Made you. Isaac ran a hand through his hair, pacing, his voice low and desperate. There's someone out there. Controlling people. Making them lose control. He did it to me before. He did it to hunters. He's trying to start something. I swear to you, Allison, I didn't want this. Allison stared at him. His voice, the rawness of it, pulled at the part of her that still believed him. But another part, the hunter part, whispered that every killer believes his own story. She swallowed hard. You expect me to tell my dad that? That some mysterious person made you murder 2 of his hunters. Isaac flinched, his jaw tightening. I don't expect you to tell him anything. I just need you to believe me. Silence stretched. The morning light crept across the floor, catching the edge of her shoes. I want to, she whispered. God, I want to. Then she turned for the door. Her hand trembled on the handle. But I don't know if I can. When she stepped outside, Isaac followed to the porch, watching her walk away. She didn't look back. He didn't call out. The air between them felt final, heavy with everything unsaid, and everything they'd both already lost. Lucas's perspective. The morning light washed over the Lockwood estate in gold. The dew still clung to the grass, and the air smelled faintly of pine and earth, the kind of stillness that promised a peaceful day. Lucas was running his usual route around the garden, the rhythm of his footsteps steady and precise. Milo darted through the hedges nearby, a blur of joy and fur, chasing some imaginary rival with the determination of a soldier. For a few minutes, Lucas let the routine steady his thoughts. But the peace was skin-deep. Beneath it, his mind was a storm. 3 hunters dead. 3 innocent people killed by manipulation and madness of the puppet master that is still hiding in the shadows. You can bet the Argents are already sharpening their knives. He took a sharp breath and increased his pace, as if he could outrun the weight of it. This place feels smaller every day, he thought. By the time he finished his run, the sun had fully risen. Milo barked once, triumphant, carrying a stick twice his size as if presenting the spoils of war. Lucas couldn't help but smile. Good job, soldier, he said, taking the stick and setting it aside before heading back inside. Upstairs, the water ran hot and steady as he stepped into the shower. For a moment, he let the steam fill the room and his thoughts quiet. When he came out, he felt lighter, or at least, less burdened. He was toweling off when his phone buzzed on the counter. The screen read, unknown number. Lucas's brow furrowed slightly. Still damp, he picked it up and answered, his voice calm. Hello. A low voice, smooth, amused, replied, It's nice to finally speak with you, Lucas. You have a beautiful house. Lucas froze for a fraction of a second, then slowly turned toward the large window. There, just beyond the estate wall, half shadowed by the trees, stood the mysterious figure. A silhouette in black, unhurried, watching him. Lucas's grip tightened around the phone, but his voice stayed even. We could have talked a lot sooner, he said dryly, if you weren't so shy. There was a soft chuckle from the other end, faint, distorted by static. Oh, I prefer to watch before I speak. You can learn so much more that way. Lucas's eyes narrowed. Then you've seen enough to know this won't end well for you. Perhaps. But endings are overrated. And then, a soft click. The call cut off. Lucas lowered the phone, gaze still fixed on the trees. The figure was gone. Vanished like smoke. Milo padded into the room, sensing his tension, and sat by his foot. Lucas absently scratched the dog's head, eyes still scanning the line of trees outside. The morning had never felt so quiet. The hunter and the hunted, separated only by a wall of stone and a game that had just stopped being won.